Hey everyone, tonight we begin with the most brutal and untold story in all of Westeros. The story of how a bastard son, born with silver hair and violet eyes, wielded a sword that was never meant to be his and nearly brought the entire Targaryen dynasty crashing down in flames and blood. This is the tale of Daemon Blackfyre, the bastard who should have been king, and the conspiracy that destroyed him. What if everything you think you know about the Blackfyre rebellion is a lie? What if the bastard wasn't the usurper, but the rightful heir? What if the greatest tragedy in Targaryen history was actually the systematic destruction of the one true king who could have saved the realm? So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year was 184 after conquest. King Aegon IV lay dying in the Red Keep, his reign of corruption finally ending. But as death approached, this king they called the Unworthy would speak words that would drown Westeros in blood for generations. "I legitimize all my bastard children," he gasped with his final breath. 7 words that shattered the peace of the 7 kingdoms forever. But here's the secret maesters have spent 3 centuries burying. Those weren't the words of a spiteful king causing chaos from the grave. They were the words of a father finally acknowledging a terrible truth. Because Daemon Blackfyre wasn't just another royal bastard seeking power, he was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The sword Blackfyre, that legendary Valyrian steel blade of Aegon the Conqueror, had been given to Daemon by his father. You don't give the Sword of Kings to anyone but a king. When Daemon drew that blade at Redgrass Field, it wasn't the weapon of a usurper, it was the sword of the true king of Westeros. But Daemon faced an enemy far more dangerous than his half-brother Daeron. A web of maesters, septons, and ambitious lords had decided the Targaryen dragons had grown too powerful. They needed to be destroyed from within. And Daemon, with his legitimate claim and natural kingship, was their greatest threat. So they painted him as a usurper. They whispered poison and spread gold. They turned brother against brother. When Daemon lay dead with Bloodraven's arrow through his throat, they wrote the histories. They made sure the world would remember him as nothing more than an ambitious bastard who reached too high. But truth has a way of surviving, hidden in forgotten letters and dying memories. The real story waits. Tonight we uncover every buried secret, every hidden truth about the greatest injustice in Westerosi history. This is how a bastard son became a king, and how that king was destroyed by those who feared him. This is the conspiracy that still shapes the 7 kingdoms today. The dying king's final words would drown Westeros in blood, but not for the reasons you've been told. Our journey begins in the shadows of the Citadel, where truth goes to die, and lies are given the weight of history. The ancient fortress of knowledge rises from Old Town, like a great grey finger pointing accusingly at the sky, its walls holding more secrets than any castle in the 7 kingdoms. Here, in chambers lit by flickering candles and filled with the musty scent of parchment older than memory, the real story of Daemon Blackfyre has been waiting 3 centuries to be told. You are the chronicler, the seeker of buried truths, drawn to this place by whispers and rumors that refuse to stay buried. For years you've heard the inconsistencies in the official histories, noticed the gaps where crucial details should be, felt the weight of deliberate omissions in every account of the Blackfyre rebellion. Tonight you've finally gained access to the restricted archives, those forbidden chambers where the maesters keep the histories they'd rather the world forget. The late reign of Aegon IV was a time when the very air in King's Landing seemed poisoned with corruption. The Red Keep had become a nest of vipers, each more venomous than the last. The king they called the Unworthy had turned his court into a marketplace where honor was sold to the highest bidder and loyalty was a commodity rarer than Valyrian steel. The stench of moral decay hung over the capital like a plague, seeping into the very stones of the ancient fortress. But it wasn't always this way. Once the Red Keep had echoed with the roar of dragons and the wisdom of kings who understood the weight of their crown. The Iron Throne had been occupied by rulers who knew that power was not a toy to be played with, but a responsibility that could crush the unworthy beneath its terrible burden. Those days seemed like distant myths by the time Aegon IV drew his last corrupted breath. Your first companion in this investigation is Maester Qyburn, though not the infamous necromancer of later years. This is his ancestor, a man of the same name who lived through the chaos of the Blackfire years. He's ancient now, his chain heavy with links earned through decades of careful study and even more careful silence. His eyes hold the weight of terrible knowledge, and when he speaks of those days, his voice carries the tremor of a man who has seen too much truth for one lifetime. The histories lie, he whispers as he leads you deeper into the archives. But the truth has a way of leaving traces, like blood on stone. You just have to know where to look. Your second guide is Sir Brynden Rivers. Though he goes by a different name in these halls, he claims to be a descendant of House Blackwood, one of the great houses that supported Daemon's cause. His family has carried the burden of that choice for generations, branded as traitors by some, heroes by others. The truth, he says, lies somewhere between the two extremes, buried beneath layers of propaganda and political necessity. The atmosphere in the archives is thick with more than just dust and age. There's a weight here, a sense that the very walls are holding their breath, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to speak the words that have been forbidden for so long. Candles flicker in drafts that seem to come from nowhere, casting dancing shadows that make the ancient texts appear to writhe and shift like living things. As you examine the first documents, the scope of the deception becomes clear. Official records from Aegon IV's reign have been carefully edited, with entire passages scraped away and rewritten. Witness testimonies from the king's deathbed have been altered so many times that the original words are lost beneath layers of revision. Even the genealogies have been tampered with, bloodlines obscured or redrawn to support the victor's version of events. But here, in these forgotten corners of the citadel, fragments of the original truth remain. A letter never sent, hidden behind the binding of a book on ancient Valyrian customs. A journal entry that somehow escaped the purges, tucked away in a collection of treatises on dragon breeding. A confession written by a dying lord, sealed and forgotten in a chest that hadn't been opened in living memory. The Red Keep during Daemon's youth was a place of contradictions. While King Aegon indulged in every vice known to man, his bastard son walked the halls with the bearing of a prince born to rule. Servants would bow deeper to Daemon than to the legitimate princes, not out of fear, but out of respect. There was something about him that commanded loyalty without demanding it, something that made men willing to follow him into the fires of hell itself. The young Daemon had been given quarters in the royal wing, an honor rarely afforded to bastards. His chambers overlooked the Blackwater Bay, where the morning sun would catch the water and turn it to molten gold. It was here that he would practice with Blackfire, the sword that sang in his hands like it had found its true master. The weapon that had conquered the Seven Kingdoms seemed to recognize its rightful wielder, even when the rest of the world refused to see what was plain before their eyes. Dragonstone, that ancient seat of Targaryen power, still remembered the days when dragons ruled the skies. The island fortress had been home to kings and princes, the place where Aegon the Conqueror had planned his great campaign. Its walls had witnessed the birth of the dynasty that would rule Westeros for centuries, but by Daemon's time, it had become little more than a symbol, a reminder of glories that seemed increasingly distant with each passing year. The volcanic stone of Dragonstone seemed to pulse with ancient power, as if the very rock remembered the heat of dragon's breath. The carved dragons that adorned every surface weren't mere decorations, but guardians of secrets that went back to the days of old Valyria. Some said that on quiet nights you could still hear the echo of wings beating through the corridors, the ghost of dragon song calling to those with the blood to hear it. As you delve deeper into the archives, guided by your companions through the labyrinth of forbidden knowledge, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The official history of the Blackfire Rebellion isn't just incomplete or biased, it's a carefully constructed lie, built from the ground up to hide a truth so dangerous that it could topple kingdoms and destroy the carefully maintained balance of power that has kept the Seven Kingdoms from tearing themselves apart completely. The weight of this realization settles on your shoulders like a mantle made of lead. You came here seeking answers to historical questions, but what you're finding is evidence of a conspiracy so vast and so carefully orchestrated that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the nature of power, legitimacy, and truth itself. The dying king's words echo in your mind as you prepare to dive deeper into the mystery. 7 words that changed everything, spoken by a man who may have been the most honest he'd ever been in his final moments. But what drove him to that moment of truth, and what forces worked so hard to make sure it would be his last honest act, remain hidden in the shadows of history, waiting for someone brave enough to drag them into the light. The decision comes to you like dawn breaking over the narrow sea, slow at first, then all at once, with brilliant clarity. You will uncover the truth about Daemon Blackfire, no matter how deep the lies have been buried, or how powerful the forces that seek to keep them hidden. The official histories paint him as nothing more than an ambitious bastard who let his dreams of power consume him. But every instinct you possess screams that this version of events is a carefully crafted deception. Maester Qyburn watches you with those ancient eyes as you make your declaration, and something that might be approval flickers across his weathered features. The path you're choosing is dangerous, he says softly, his voice barely above a whisper in the candlelit chamber. There are those who have killed to keep these secrets buried, and they won't hesitate to do so again. But if you're truly committed to this quest, then I will help you. The truth deserves to see light, even if that light burns away everything we thought we knew. Sir Brynden nods his agreement, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on the pommel of his sword. My family has carried the shame of supporting a supposed usurper for 3 centuries. If there's even a chance that shame is undeserved, then I owe it to my ancestors to help you discover the truth. They died believing they were fighting for the rightful king. I need to know if they were right. The first fragments of evidence you uncover are like pieces of a shattered mirror, each one reflecting a different aspect of a truth that has been deliberately fragmented and scattered. Hidden within a treatise on Valyrian steel forging techniques, you find a letter that was never meant to survive. It's written in the hand of Lord Viserys Plum, one of Daemon's most trusted supporters, and dated just weeks before the Battle of Redgrass Field. The letter speaks of the king's true heir and mentions evidence that cannot be denied regarding Daemon's legitimacy. But the most intriguing passage refers to a document that Aegon IV supposedly signed years before his death, acknowledging Daemon as his rightful successor. His grace grows weary of the charade, Lord Plum writes. He speaks often of setting matters right before death claims him, of ensuring the realm passes to its true king, rather than the pretender who currently enjoys the favor of those who seek to weaken the dragon's blood. This letter alone would be enough to revolutionize understanding of the Blackfire Rebellion, but it raises as many questions as it answers. If Aegon had already acknowledged Daemon's legitimacy years before his deathbed proclamation, why was it kept secret? What charade was Lord Plum referring to? And who was the pretender he mentioned? Your investigation takes you deeper into the archives, where documents that haven't seen daylight for decades crumble at your touch. Here, In a collection of correspondence between various maesters, you find references to a great working that was being undertaken during Aegon's reign. The language is deliberately obscure, coded in the way that learned men use when they wish to discuss dangerous topics without being explicit about their meaning. One letter, written by Grand Maester Mellus to his successor, contains a passage that makes your blood run cold. The work proceeds as planned. The false branch grows strong, while the true one is weakened by careful pruning. When the time comes, the realm will accept what we present as natural succession, never knowing how carefully we have guided events to this conclusion. The dragons must never again grow so powerful that they threaten the stability we have worked so hard to achieve. The implications of this correspondence are staggering. It suggests a conspiracy among the Maesters themselves, a deliberate effort to manipulate the Targaryen succession for their own purposes. But what were those purposes? What stability were they trying to achieve? And why did they see strong dragons as a threat to it? As you piece together these fragments, a picture begins to emerge of the court during Daemon's youth that is radically different from the one presented in the official histories. Far from being a simple bastard seeking to overthrow his legitimate brother, Daemon appears to have been at the center of a complex web of political intrigue that stretched back years before the rebellion itself. The young Daemon had been a figure of remarkable charisma and natural authority, qualities that had not gone unnoticed by the great lords of the realm, lords who had grown increasingly concerned about the direction of Aegon's rule and the weakness they perceived in his chosen heir. Many had begun to look to Daemon as a potential solution to the realm's problems, seeing in him the strength and wisdom that seemed lacking in the official line of succession. But there were others who viewed Daemon's growing influence with alarm. The same correspondence that reveals the Maester conspiracy also hints at involvement from the Faith of the Seven, whose leadership had grown increasingly concerned about what they saw as the Targaryens' tendency toward practices that contradicted traditional Westerosi values. The High Septon during this period, Benedin the Blessed, had made several public statements about the importance of legitimate succession and the dangers of allowing bastards to rise above their proper station. Your research reveals that these weren't random theological musings, but part of a coordinated campaign to undermine Daemon's position. The faith had begun preaching that legitimacy was not something that could be granted by royal decree, but was a sacred principle that existed beyond the reach of earthly kings. By this logic, Aegon's legitimization of his bastards was not just politically questionable but spiritually invalid. The deeper you dig, the more you realize that the forces arrayed against Daemon were not reacting to his rebellion, but were actively working to create the conditions that would make rebellion inevitable. They needed him to appear as the aggressor, the bastard who was overreaching his proper place. Only by forcing him into the role of usurper could they justify the destruction they had planned for him. But what had driven them to such lengths? What was it about Daemon that made him so dangerous that these various factions were willing to risk civil war to eliminate him? The answer, you begin to suspect, lies not in what Daemon was trying to do, but in what he represented. He was living proof that legitimacy could not be manufactured or manipulated, that true kingship was something that existed independent of titles and ceremonies. In Daemon, the realm saw what a Targaryen king could be when he possessed not just the blood of dragons, but the character to match it. He was everything that Darien was not, everything that Aegon had never been, and that made him the most dangerous man in Westeros to those who had spent years carefully positioning themselves to control a weak dynasty. The evidence you uncover paints a picture of a young man who had been carefully watched and studied from childhood, his every move analyzed for signs of the threat he might pose. There are reports from various sources describing his training with weapons, his interactions with the castle staff, even his reading habits. Someone had been building a detailed profile of Daemon Blackfyre long before he ever showed any signs of rebellion. One particularly chilling document is a letter from an unnamed source to Grand Maester Mellus, describing a conversation they had overheard between Daemon and his weapon master. The young bastard had been practicing with Blackfire and had made an offhand comment about feeling as if the sword had been waiting for him to claim it. The letter writer notes that this comment shows the dangerous delusions of legitimacy that we feared would develop and recommends accelerating our timeline before these delusions can spread to others. As night falls over Old Town and the candles burn lower in their holders, you find yourself staring at a collection of documents that completely reframes everything you thought you knew about the Blackfire Rebellion. This wasn't a story of an ambitious bastard reaching too high and paying the price for his hubris. This was the story of a legitimate heir being systematically destroyed by forces that feared what he represented. But even as the evidence mounts, you realize that you've only scratched the surface of this conspiracy. The documents you've found tonight are just the beginning. Fragments of a much larger truth that has been carefully dismantled and scattered to prevent exactly the kind of investigation you're now conducting. Maester Qyburn extinguishes the last candle as you prepare to leave the archives for the night. What we've discovered tonight is dangerous knowledge, he says quietly. There are those who would kill to keep it buried. But now that we've begun this journey, there's no turning back. The truth has been hidden too long, and it demands to be spoken, no matter the cost. As you make your way through the darkened corridors of the Citadel, you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. The shadows seem deeper than they should be, and every sound echoes with ominous significance. You've crossed a line tonight, moving from curious historian to active threat to a conspiracy that has shaped the Seven Kingdoms for 3 centuries. The investigation that began as an academic exercise has become something far more dangerous. You're no longer just seeking to understand the past, but to expose a truth that could fundamentally alter the present. And somewhere in the darkness, forces that have kept this secret for 300 years are beginning to stir, awakening to deal with the threat you now represent. Tomorrow, your real journey will begin, taking you beyond the safety of the Citadel's walls and into the wider world where the truth about Daemon Blackfire lies scattered like bones on an ancient battlefield, waiting for someone brave enough to piece them back together and speak the name of the king who was murdered before he could claim his crown. The dawn brings with it a sense of urgency that wasn't there the night before. As you return to the archives with your companions, you carry the weight of what you've already discovered and the knowledge that each revelation only deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. The fragments you uncovered yesterday were just the beginning, tantalizing glimpses of a truth so carefully hidden that even finding these pieces feels like a miracle. Maester Qyburn has brought with him a collection of documents that he's kept hidden for decades, wrapped in oiled leather and stored in a secret compartment behind his personal chambers. His hands shake slightly as he unwraps them, not from age, but from the magnitude of what he's about to reveal. These came into my possession through channels I cannot reveal, he says quietly. They were saved by someone who believed that future generations deserved to know the truth, even if it couldn't be spoken safely in their own time. What you're about to see will change everything you think you know about the legitimacy of the Targaryen succession. The first document is a marriage contract, written in High Valyrian and bearing the seals of both House Targaryen and House Blackwood. The parchment is old beyond measure, its edges worn and discolored, but the text is still clearly legible to those trained in the ancient tongue. What it reveals sends a shock through your entire understanding of Daemon's parentage. According to this contract, Aegon IV had secretly married Melissa Blackwood, Daemon's mother, in a ceremony conducted according to ancient Valyrian customs. The marriage had been witnessed by 3 members of the Kingsguard and blessed by a septon who served the royal family. This wasn't a simple relationship between a king and his mistress, but a legitimate marriage that predated Aegon's official union with his sister wife by several years. The implications are staggering. If this document is authentic, then Daemon wasn't a bastard at all, but a true-born prince with a claim to the throne that superseded even that of his younger half-brother Daeron. The secret marriage would explain why Aegon had been so willing to give Daemon the sword Blackfire, and why so many lords had been willing to support his cause when the rebellion finally erupted. But the document also raises troubling questions. Why had the marriage been kept secret? Why had Aegon allowed Daemon to be labeled a bastard for so many years if he was actually legitimate? And most importantly, what had happened to force Aegon to hide the truth about his firstborn son's parentage? Sir Brynden studies the marriage contract with the intensity of a man whose entire family history depends on its authenticity. "This changes everything," he whispers. "If Daemon was legitimate, then my ancestors weren't supporting a usurper. They were fighting for the rightful king of Westeros." But why was this kept hidden? What could have been so dangerous about acknowledging the marriage? The answer comes in the next document that Maester Qyburn produces, a letter written in Aegon's own hand and addressed to his brother Prince Aemon, who would later become known as the Dragon Knight. The letter is dated several years after Daemon's birth and carries the weight of a confession that was never meant to be preserved. "Brother," the letter begins, "the burden of kingship grows heavier with each passing day, and the choices I have made in the name of peace may damn us all. The marriage to Melissa was done in love and in accordance with our family's ancient traditions, but the realm was not ready to accept a Blackwood queen. The Reach threatens rebellion if our upstart house is elevated above their ancient bloodlines, and Dawn whispers of renewed war if we abandon the careful balance that keeps the kingdoms united." The letter goes on to detail the political pressures that had forced Aegon to hide his marriage and allow his firstborn son to be branded a bastard. The great houses of Westeros, it seems, had made it clear that they would not accept Melissa Blackwood as queen, regardless of the legitimacy of her marriage to the king. Rather than risk civil war over the issue, Aegon had chosen to hide the truth and officially marry his sister Nerys instead. But perhaps the most chilling part of the letter comes near the end, where Aegon expresses his fear that the deception might have consequences that extend far beyond his own reign. "I fear that by denying Daemon his birthright, I may have doomed him to a fate worse than bastardry. There are those at court who see him as a threat regardless of his official status, and I grow concerned that they may take steps to eliminate that threat permanently. If anything should happen to me before I can set matters right, I pray that you will protect him and ensure that the truth eventually comes to light." The letter is signed with Aegon's royal seal and dated just 3 years before his death, suggesting that he had been planning to reveal the truth about Daemon's parentage for some time before his final illness forced his hand. But someone had clearly been working just as hard to ensure that the truth would never see the light of day. Your investigation takes you deeper into the archives, where you discover evidence of a systematic campaign to discredit and undermine Daemon's position at court. Documents that should have been destroyed reveal a network of informants and agents working to gather information about Daemon's activities, his supporters, and his plans. Every conversation was monitored, every alliance was noted, every gesture of support was carefully catalogued by unseen watchers. One particularly damning piece of evidence is a series of reports written by someone identified only as the Whisperer, who appears to have had access to the highest levels of the royal court. These reports detail not just Daemon's actions, but his thoughts and motivations as interpreted by this mysterious observer. The picture they paint is of a young man who was growing increasingly aware of his true heritage and increasingly frustrated by his treatment as a mere bastard. The prince shows signs of understanding his true position. One report reads, "He has begun asking questions about his mother's family and the circumstances of their relationship with the king. Lord Commander Aemon has been observed speaking with him privately on several occasions, and we suspect he may be revealing details about the hidden marriage. If this continues, the prince may soon realize that he is the rightful heir, which would force us to accelerate our plans for his removal." The casual mention of Daemon's removal sends a chill through your spine. This wasn't just political maneuvering or character assassination, but evidence of a plot to physically eliminate the true heir to the throne. The conspiracy against Daemon had been far more extensive and deadly than anyone had imagined. But who was behind this network of spies and informants? The reports are unsigned and contain no clear indication of their intended recipient, but certain phrases and references suggest connections to both the Citadel and the Faith of the Seven. References to maintaining the natural order and preventing the corruption of legitimate succession echo the language used in religious texts of the period, while discussions of long-term stability and controlling dangerous bloodlines sound more like the calculated planning of maesters. As you continue your research, you begin to uncover evidence of financial transactions that paint an even more disturbing picture of the conspiracy against Daemon. Gold had flowed from various sources to fund opposition to the true heir, with payments made to sellswords, corrupt officials, and ambitious lords who were willing to support the false narrative of Daemon's illegitimacy in exchange for personal advancement. One ledger, hidden within a collection of agricultural records from the Reach, details payments made to agents in the capital for services rendered in support of legitimate succession. The amounts are staggering, representing enough gold to hire armies or buy the loyalty of entire households. Someone had been investing heavily in ensuring that Daemon would never be able to claim his rightful place on the Iron Throne. The most shocking discovery comes when you find a copy of Aegon's original will, hidden within a false bottom of a chest that had supposedly been emptied decades ago. This will, dated just months before the king's death, clearly states his intention to reveal the truth about Daemon's legitimacy and formally name him as heir to the throne. It also contains provisions for protecting Daemon from those who would see him harmed for the crime of being born to the wrong woman at the wrong time. But this will was never executed. Instead, Aegon had died suddenly, before he could take the steps necessary to legitimize his firstborn son and expose the truth about the hidden marriage. His final words, legitimizing all his bastards, had been a desperate attempt to provide some protection for Daemon, but it had come too late to prevent the conspiracy from achieving its goals. The evidence mounting before you creates a picture of systematic manipulation and deception that stretches back years before the Blackfyre Rebellion ever began. Daemon hadn't been a usurper seeking to steal his brother's throne, but a legitimate heir who had been systematically destroyed by forces that feared what his rule might mean for their own power and influence. As the day wears on and more documents are examined, you begin to realize that the conspiracy against Daemon had been even more sophisticated than you initially suspected. It hadn't been enough to simply discredit him, or even to have him killed quietly. His enemies had needed to ensure that his death would be seen as justified, that history would remember him as a traitor rather than a martyred king. The rebellion itself had been carefully orchestrated, with provocations and manipulations designed to force Daemon into a position where he would have no choice but to fight for his rights. Once he took up arms, he could be branded as a usurper and traitor, making his eventual defeat and death appear to be the natural consequence of his own ambition rather than the result of a carefully planned assassination. But even as the scope of the conspiracy becomes clear, you realize that you've only scratched the surface of this centuries-old deception. The forces that destroyed Daemon Blackfyre had been powerful enough to reshape history itself, and they had clearly taken steps to ensure that the truth would remain buried for as long as possible. As evening approaches, and you prepare to leave the archives once again, Maester Qyburn places a weathered hand on your shoulder. "What we've discovered today proves that Daemon was the rightful king," he says quietly. "But it also proves that his enemies were willing to commit treason, murder, and fraud to prevent him from claiming his throne. The question now is whether we're brave enough to continue digging, knowing that we're uncovering crimes that some might still be willing to kill to keep hidden." The weight of that question hangs heavy in the air as you gather the documents and prepare to secure them for the night. You've crossed another line today, moving from suspicion to certainty about the injustice done to Daemon Blackfyre. But with that certainty comes the knowledge that you're now in possession of information that could destroy reputations, topple dynasties, and rewrite the history of Westeros itself. Tomorrow, your investigation will take you beyond documents and into the wider world, where the living descendants of those who participated in this conspiracy may still be working to keep their ancestors' crimes buried in the darkness where they've hidden for 3 centuries. The morning light filtering through the archive windows carries with it a sense of satisfaction that you haven't felt since beginning this investigation. The evidence you've gathered over the past days seems to tell a complete story, one that finally makes sense of the contradictions and inconsistencies that first drew you to question the official histories. Daemon Blackfyre was the legitimate heir, wrongfully branded a bastard by political necessity and destroyed by a conspiracy that feared his rightful claim to the throne. As you sit surrounded by the documents that have reshaped your understanding of Westerosi history, you feel the satisfaction of a puzzle finally solved. The secret marriage, the hidden will, the network of spies and informants, all of it points to the same conclusion. Aegon IV had been forced by political pressure to hide his firstborn son's legitimacy, and those same political forces had eventually arranged for Daemon's destruction when it became clear that the truth might eventually come to light. Maester Qyburn nods approvingly as you lay out your conclusions, his ancient eyes bright with what appears to be relief. "You've done remarkable work," he says, his voice carrying the weight of decades of carefully guarded secrets. "The truth about Daemon's legitimacy has been hidden for so long that I sometimes wondered if it would ever be revealed. But you've pieced together the evidence brilliantly. The realm deserves to know that the Blackfyre Rebellion wasn't a usurpation, but the last stand of the rightful king." Sir Bryndon's reaction is even more profound. For the first time since you've known him, the constant tension that has marked his bearing seems to ease. 3 centuries, he whispers, staring at the marriage contract that proves Daemon's legitimacy. 3 centuries, my family has carried the shame of supporting what the world called a usurper. But we were right. My ancestors died fighting for the true king of Westeros. There's honor in that, even if the world never knew it. The story seems complete, a tragedy of political necessity and dynastic intrigue that resulted in the death of a rightful king and the elevation of a pretender. It's a satisfying conclusion, one that explains the inconsistencies in the official records and provides justice, however delayed, for Daemon Blackfyre. You begin to organize your findings, preparing to document this historical revelation for posterity. But even as you arrange the evidence into a coherent narrative, something continues to nag at the edges of your consciousness. It's nothing you can put your finger on at first, just a vague sense that despite the completeness of your discoveries, you're still missing something crucial. The conspiracy against Daemon had been extensive and sophisticated, but was it really just about preventing a Blackwood from becoming queen? Had the great houses of Westeros really been willing to commit treason and murder simply to maintain their prejudices about bloodlines? The feeling grows stronger as you examine the financial records again. The amounts of gold that had been spent to destroy Daemon was staggering, far more than would have been necessary for a simple political assassination. Someone had invested heavily in not just killing the rightful heir, but in creating an entire alternative narrative that would justify his death for centuries to come. That level of planning and investment suggested motivations that went far beyond mere prejudice or political convenience. Sir Bryndon is the first to voice what you're all beginning to feel. "Something's not right," he says quietly, his earlier relief beginning to fade. "I'm grateful beyond words to know that my ancestors were fighting for the rightful king, but this conspiracy was too elaborate, too expensive, too carefully planned for it to have been just about keeping a Blackwood off the throne. There's something else, something we're not seeing." His words echo your own growing doubts. The evidence you've gathered is compelling and seems to tell a complete story, but it also feels too neat, too convenient. Conspiracies of this magnitude don't arise from simple prejudice or political maneuvering. They require deeper motivations, existential threats that justify the enormous risks and costs involved in reshaping history itself. Maester Qyburn has been unusually quiet during this discussion, his face wearing an expression that suggests internal conflict. When you finally ask him directly about your concerns, he sighs deeply and looks away from the documents spread across the table. "You're right to feel that something is missing," he admits reluctantly. "The evidence you've found is all genuine, and your conclusions about Daemon's legitimacy are absolutely correct. But there are other documents, other pieces of this puzzle that I haven't shared with you yet. I had hoped that what we'd already discovered would be enough, that you wouldn't need to dig deeper into the truly dangerous secrets." The revelation that your guide has been holding back information sends a chill through the chamber. If the conspiracy to destroy Daemon was even more complex than what you've already uncovered, then the forces involved must have had motivations that went to the very heart of Westerosi society. What could have been so threatening about Daemon's rule that it justified not just his death but the elaborate deception that followed? The marriage contract and the will prove that Daemon was legitimate. Maester Qyburn continues, his voice heavy with reluctance. But they don't explain why certain factions were so desperate to prevent him from taking the throne. The answer to that question lies in documents that are far more dangerous than anything we've examined so far. Knowledge that could destabilize not just our understanding of the past, but the foundations of power in the present. As the implications of his words sink in, you realize that your investigation has only just begun. The evidence of Daemon's legitimacy was shocking enough, but it was apparently just the surface layer of a conspiracy that ran much deeper than you had imagined. Whatever had driven the various factions to destroy the rightful heir had been important enough to justify centuries of deception and the investment of enormous resources. The comfortable satisfaction of having solved the puzzle begins to evaporate, replaced by a growing sense of unease. If there were deeper secrets still to be uncovered, then the danger you faced was far greater than you had realized. The forces that had destroyed Daemon Blackfyre had clearly been powerful enough to reshape history itself, and they might still have descendants or successors who would be willing to protect their ancestors' crimes. But despite the growing danger, you know that you cannot stop now. The truth about Daemon's legitimacy is important, but it's clearly not the whole truth. Whatever had made him such a threat that powerful factions were willing to commit treason and murder to stop him, that secret deserves to be revealed as well. The rightful king had been denied justice for 3 centuries, and he deserves to have the full story of his destruction finally brought to light. As you prepare to delve deeper into the mystery, Ser Brynden places his hand on his sword hilt in an unconscious gesture of preparation for danger. "My family has waited 300 years for the truth about Daemon Blackfyre," he says firmly. "If there are deeper secrets to be uncovered, then we owe it to his memory to find them, no matter the cost. The rightful king deserves to have his full story told." Maester Qyburn nods slowly, his internal conflict finally resolved. "Very well," he says quietly. "But once we go down this path, there will be no turning back. The secrets I'm about to share with you have been hidden for good reason. They concern not just Daemon's legitimacy, but the very nature of power itself in Westeros. They explain why his rule would have been so threatening that entire institutions were willing to commit unspeakable crimes to prevent it." The weight of anticipation hangs heavy in the chamber as you prepare to discover what lies beneath the surface of the conspiracy you thought you had already understood. The evidence of Daemon's legitimacy had been shocking enough, but it was apparently just the beginning of a truth so dangerous that it had been buried beneath layers of deception for 3 centuries. As Maester Qyburn begins to unlock a hidden compartment that you hadn't even noticed before, you realize that everything you thought you knew about the Blackfire Rebellion is about to change once again. The rightful king had been destroyed not just for who he was, but for what he represented, and that representation had been threatening enough to justify the most elaborate conspiracy in Westerosi history. The documents that emerge from the hidden compartment are wrapped in black silk and bound with chains that look far older than anything else in the archive. As Maester Qyburn begins to unwrap them, his hands shake with something that goes beyond mere age. These are clearly secrets that he has never wanted to reveal, knowledge that he has carried as a burden for decades. What you're about to learn, he says quietly, will change not just your understanding of Daemon Blackfire, but your understanding of the very foundations upon which the Seven Kingdoms rest. The conspiracy that destroyed him wasn't just about preventing a Blackwood from becoming queen. It was about preventing the emergence of a king who might have had the power to remake Westeros entirely, to challenge institutions and traditions that had shaped the realm for thousands of years. As the first document is revealed, you catch a glimpse of text written in a script so ancient that it predates even the conquest. Whatever secrets these documents contain, they clearly reach back into the deepest history of Westeros, connecting Daemon's destruction to forces and motivations that stretch back far beyond the political maneuvering of Aegon's court. The sensation of standing on the edge of a revelation that will change everything you thought you knew washes over you like a cold tide. The evidence of Daemon's legitimacy had been just the beginning, the first layer of truth hiding even more dangerous secrets beneath. As you prepare to uncover those secrets, you can only hope that you have the strength to bear the weight of knowledge that others have literally killed to keep hidden. The ancient documents that Maester Qyburn unwraps from their black silk bindings carry the weight of forbidden knowledge that has been hidden from the world for millennia. The parchment is so old that it seems to crumble at the slightest touch, and the text is written in scripts that predate not just the conquest, but the arrival of the Andals themselves. These are secrets from the dawn of Westerosi civilization, knowledge that was ancient when the first men still worshipped the old gods beneath the weirwood trees. As you struggle to decipher the archaic text with Maester Qyburn's help, a picture begins to emerge that fundamentally alters your understanding of not just Daemon Blackfire, but the entire structure of power in Westeros. The documents speak of bloodlines that carry more than just noble heritage, of genetic legacies that stretch back to the earliest days of human settlement in the known world. The first scroll you manage to translate speaks of something called the Dragon Lord's Covenant, an agreement made between the surviving Dragon Lords of Valyria and certain bloodlines that had existed in Westeros since before recorded history. According to this document, the Targaryen conquest of Westeros hadn't been a simple military campaign, but the fulfillment of an ancient compact that granted the Dragon Lords dominion over the continent in exchange for their protection of something called the Old Powers. The blood of the dragon shall rule when the blood of the first kings runs pure, the text reads in the flowing script of Old Valyrian. But when corruption touches the line of succession, when pretenders claim thrones that are not theirs by right, the old powers shall withdraw their blessing, and the realm shall know chaos until true kingship is restored. The implications of this passage are staggering. It suggests that the Targaryen dynasty's right to rule Westeros wasn't based solely on conquest, but on some deeper spiritual or magical compact that required specific bloodline requirements to maintain its validity. If this document is authentic, then the question of who held the Iron Throne wasn't just a matter of political succession, but of cosmic significance that could affect the very stability of the realm. But the most shocking revelation comes in the next document, a genealogical chart that traces bloodlines back through thousands of years of Westerosi history. According to this ancient record, the Blackwood family wasn't just another noble house with a respectable pedigree, but direct descendants of the first men kings who had ruled the Riverlands before the Andal invasion. More importantly, Their bloodline carried what the document refers to as the Mark of the Old Powers, a genetic legacy that supposedly granted them a unique spiritual connection to the land itself. Sir Brynden stares at the genealogical chart with something approaching awe. "This changes everything," he whispers. "If this is true, then Daemon wasn't just the legitimate son of a secret marriage. He was the union of two of the most ancient and powerful bloodlines in Westeros, dragon blood and the blood of the first men kings combined in a single heir." The marriage between Aegon and Melissa Blackwood suddenly takes on an entirely different significance. It hadn't been a simple love match or political alliance, but a joining of bloodlines that hadn't been united since the earliest days of human civilization in Westeros. According to the ancient documents, such a union would produce an heir with unprecedented spiritual and possibly magical authority over the realm. As you delve deeper into the archives, guided by these revelations, you begin to uncover evidence that the various factions who opposed Daemon had been well aware of these ancient prophecies and bloodline requirements. References to the abomination of mixed blood and the corruption of ancient compacts begin to appear in correspondence between Maesters Septons and certain lords who viewed Daemon's potential rule as a threat to the established order. But the opposition wasn't just about preserving political power or maintaining traditional structures. The documents reveal that there were those who genuinely believed that allowing Daemon to claim the throne would fundamentally alter the nature of reality in Westeros, awakening powers that had been dormant since the dawn of history. Some saw this as a catastrophic threat that had to be prevented at any cost, while others viewed it as a restoration of the natural order that had been disrupted by centuries of political maneuvering. Your investigation takes you beyond the Citadel's archives and into the hidden chambers beneath Old Town itself, where even older secrets wait to be discovered. Here, in caverns carved from living rock and decorated with symbols that predate any known civilization, you find evidence of the old powers that the ancient documents had referenced. The chambers are filled with an atmosphere that feels charged with barely contained energy, as if the very air itself remembers the presence of forces that once shaped the destiny of nations. Strange symbols cover the walls, carved with a precision that seems impossible for the tools available to ancient peoples. When you place your hand against one of these symbols, you feel a vibration that seems to emanate from the earth itself, a thrumming pulse that suggests vast powers lying dormant beneath your feet. Maester Qyburn leads you deeper into these ancient spaces, his face grave with the weight of knowledge he's carried for decades. "These chambers were old when the Citadel was built," he explains quietly. "The Maesters who founded our order knew of their existence, but they chose to build above them rather than explore them. They understood that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, that some powers are better left undisturbed." In the deepest chamber, you discover what appears to be an ancient altar or focal point, surrounded by concentric circles of symbols that seem to shift and change when you're not looking directly at them. The air here thrums with such intensity that you can feel it in your bones, a resonance that speaks of connections between the physical and spiritual worlds that modern science has forgotten how to perceive. But perhaps the most significant discovery comes when you find a hidden alcove containing scrolls that detail the actual mechanics of the old powers and their connection to the Targaryen dynasty. According to these documents, the dragons themselves had been more than just weapons of war or symbols of royal authority. They had been living conduits for forces that maintained the balance between order and chaos in the natural world. The scrolls speak of dragon blood as a catalyst that could amplify and direct the old powers, but only when combined with bloodlines that carried the proper spiritual heritage. The Targaryens alone had been able to control dragons because their Valyrian ancestry included genetic markers that resonated with these ancient forces. But their authority over Westeros itself had required a different kind of legitimacy, one that could only come from union with the bloodlines that had been connected to the land since its earliest settlement. As you study these revelations, a pattern begins to emerge that explains not just the conspiracy against Daemon, but the broader decline of Targaryen power over the centuries. The dynasty's dragons had begun to weaken and die out, not because of any mundane cause, but because the bloodline had become increasingly separated from the spiritual connections that had originally sustained their power. Each generation that ruled without the proper bloodline connections had weakened the cosmic compact that granted them authority. By the time of Aegon IV, the dynasty was hanging on to power through pure political maneuvering rather than the spiritual legitimacy that had originally justified their rule. Daemon's potential ascension to the throne represented the possibility of restoring that lost connection, of reuniting the bloodlines in a way that could have revitalized not just the Targaryen dynasty, but the very foundations of royal authority in Westeros. But such a restoration would have fundamentally threatened every institution and tradition that had developed during the centuries of weakened Targaryen rule. The Maesters, the Faith, and the great houses had all grown powerful by filling the vacuum left by the dynasty's spiritual decline. A true restoration of dragon authority would have swept away their carefully accumulated power and influence, returning Westeros to a system of governance that operated according to principles they no longer understood or controlled. The conspiracy against Daemon hadn't been about preventing a bastard from claiming a throne he didn't deserve. It had been about preventing the rightful heir from reclaiming powers that would have made him not just a king, but something approaching a force of nature. The various factions involved had been fighting not just for political control, but for the very soul of Westerosi civilization. As you emerge from the ancient chambers beneath Old Town, the weight of this knowledge presses down on you like a physical burden. The scope of the conspiracy against Daemon had been even more vast and complex than you had imagined, involving not just political maneuvering, but a fundamental struggle over the nature of reality itself in Westeros. The peaceful night air feels strange against your skin, after hours spent in chambers that thrummed with ancient power. Above you the stars wheel in their eternal patterns, and you find yourself wondering how many other secrets lie hidden beneath the seemingly mundane surface of the world. If bloodlines and spiritual compacts could determine the fate of kingdoms, what other forces might be shaping events in ways that ordinary people never suspected? Your investigation has taken you far beyond the simple question of Daemon's legitimacy, and into realms of knowledge that most people would dismiss as fantasy or superstition. But the evidence is undeniable, carved in stone older than memory, and written in scripts that predate the recorded history of Westeros. The destruction of Daemon Blackfyre hadn't just been a political assassination, but an act of cosmic significance that had altered the spiritual foundations of the realm itself. As you prepare to delve even deeper into this mystery, you realize that you're no longer just investigating a historical injustice, but uncovering secrets that could reshape the present as fundamentally as they explain the past. The forces that destroyed Daemon may no longer be active, but the consequences of their actions continue to reverberate through Westeros 3 centuries later. The rightful king had been more than just a man with a legitimate claim to a throne. He had been the potential catalyst for a transformation that would have returned Westeros to its spiritual roots and restored the cosmic balance that had been disrupted by centuries of political corruption. His death hadn't just denied him a crown, but had condemned the realm to continue struggling with the fundamental disconnection between its rulers and the deeper forces that shaped its destiny. Tomorrow, your investigation will take you even further into this hidden history, seeking to understand not just what Daemon represented, but who specifically had orchestrated his destruction, and why they had been willing to risk the spiritual stability of the entire realm to maintain their temporal power. The dawn after your discovery of the ancient chambers beneath Old Town brings with it a profound shift in your understanding of not just Daemon Blackfyre's story, but the entire sweep of Westerosi history. As you sit in the archive chamber, Surrounded by documents that speak of bloodlines and cosmic compacts, you begin to see patterns that stretch back through the centuries like ripples on a vast pond, each Targaryen civil war echoing the themes and conflicts that had first emerged with Daemon's destruction. The Dance of Dragons, that terrible conflict that had nearly destroyed the Targaryen dynasty 2 centuries before Daemon's birth, suddenly takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of what you've discovered. The war between Aegon II and his sister Rhaenyra hadn't just been about male versus female succession, but about competing interpretations of what it meant to be a legitimate Targaryen ruler. According to the ancient texts you've been studying, Rhaenyra's claim had been weakened not by her gender, but by the fact that her bloodline lacked the proper spiritual connections to the old powers. Her children by Harwin Strong carried none of the genetic markers that would have allowed them to properly channel the forces that sustained Targaryen authority, while Aegon's sons, despite their obvious flaws, maintained the pure Valyrian bloodline that the ancient compact required. But the Dance of Dragons had also established a precedent that would plague the dynasty for generations to come. By allowing political considerations to override spiritual legitimacy, the Targaryens had begun the process of severing their connection to the deeper sources of their power. Each generation that chose pragmatic succession over mystical requirements had weakened the bonds that held their authority together. Maester Qyburn spreads out a collection of genealogical charts that trace these patterns through the centuries, showing how each major crisis in Targaryen history had involved conflicts between claimants who possessed different aspects of the spiritual authority that true kingship required. Look at the pattern, he says, pointing to the intricate web of bloodlines and connections. Every time the dynasty has faced a succession crisis, it's been because they've tried to separate political power from spiritual legitimacy. The charts reveal a troubling truth about the Targaryen approach to rule. While they had maintained their ability to hatch and ride dragons through careful preservation of their Valyrian bloodline, they had largely ignored the equally important requirement for spiritual connection to the land they ruled. This disconnect had made their authority increasingly brittle, dependent on fear and force, rather than the natural legitimacy that had originally justified their conquest. Your investigation takes you to the abandoned ruins of Summerhall, where another Targaryen tragedy had played out just decades before Robert's rebellion. Here, among the blackened stones and twisted metal, you find evidence that King Aegon V had been attempting to restore the dynasty's lost connection to its mystical roots. The disaster that destroyed him and most of his family hadn't been an accident, but the result of his efforts to reawaken powers that had been dormant for too long. The ruins of Summerhall tell a story of desperate ambition and tragic failure. Aegon V, known to history as Aegon the Unlikely, had spent his reign trying to address the problems that had plagued his dynasty since the death of the last dragon. He had understood perhaps better than any Targaryen since the conquest that their authority rested on more than just political maneuvering or military might. Among the debris, you discover fragments of texts that Aegon had gathered from across the known world, all dealing with the mystical aspects of royal authority and the proper relationship between rulers and the spiritual forces that shaped their realms. These weren't the ravings of a madman, but the careful research of a king who understood that his dynasty was dying from within and was desperately seeking a way to restore its vitality. The tragedy at Summerhall becomes even more poignant when you realize that Aegon's efforts might actually have succeeded if he had possessed the proper bloodline combinations that Daemon Blackfyre had carried. The rituals and ceremonies that had destroyed Summerhall had been designed to reawaken the old powers and restore the spiritual compact that granted Targaryen authority. But they had required genetic components that Aegon's pure Valyrian bloodline couldn't provide. Sir Brynden examines the evidence from Summerhall with the intensity of a man seeing his family's history reflected in another's tragedy. Aegon V understood what his dynasty had lost, he observes quietly, but he didn't understand what would be required to restore it. He had the dragon blood, but not the connection to the land itself that would have made his efforts successful. As you study the patterns that emerge from these historical parallels, you begin to understand that Daemon's story wasn't unique but part of a recurring cycle that had shaped Targaryen history since the conquest. Again and again, the dynasty had faced moments when they could have restored their spiritual authority and reconnected with the deeper sources of their power. But political considerations and incomplete understanding had prevented them from taking the necessary steps. The ancient texts speak of this pattern as inevitable, the result of trying to maintain authority through incomplete means. The blood of the dragon without the blessing of the land shall diminish with each generation. One passage reads, "Until the proper union is achieved, each king shall be weaker than his father, each dragon smaller than those that came before." Your investigation takes you to the Isle of Faces, that mysterious refuge in the middle of the God's Eye, where the old gods still hold sway and the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds remain permeable. Here, among the ancient weirwood trees that have witnessed the entire history of Westeros, you hope to find the final pieces of the puzzle that will explain not just what Daemon represented, but why his potential rule had been seen as such a threat. The journey to the Isle of Faces requires careful preparation and considerable courage. The waters of the God's Eye are known to be treacherous, and the island itself is said to be protected by forces that don't welcome intruders. But as your small boat approaches the mist-shrouded shores, you feel the same thrumming energy that you had encountered in the chambers beneath Old Town, suggesting that this place is indeed connected to the old powers in ways that most people have forgotten. The weirwood trees that cover the island are unlike any you've seen before, their faces carved with expressions of such profound wisdom and sorrow that looking at them feels like gazing into the accumulated memory of the world itself. The air beneath their branches shimmers with possibilities, and you find yourself understanding, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that this place exists partially outside the normal flow of time and space. In the heart of the island, you discover a grove where the weirwood trees have grown in a perfect circle around a natural clearing. The ground here is covered with symbols that match those you found in the chambers beneath Old Town, but these are carved into living rock that seems to pulse with its own internal light. At the center of the clearing stands a single black stone, its surface covered with text in a script so ancient that it predates even the first men. As you struggle to decipher the writing with the help of the ancient texts you've brought from the Citadel, a picture emerges of the true scope of what had been at stake when Daemon Blackfire died at Redgrass Field. According to the stone's inscription, the union of dragon blood with the blood of the first men would have done more than just restore the Targaryen dynasty's spiritual authority. It would have reawakened the old powers throughout Westeros, fundamentally altering the relationship between the natural and supernatural worlds. The inscription speaks of an age when the barriers between realms were thinner, when magic flowed through the land like water through streams, and when rulers possessed the ability to communicate directly with the forces that shaped the destiny of their people. This wasn't just political authority, but a form of governance that operated according to principles that modern civilization had forgotten. But the stone also warns of the dangers inherent in such power. "Let the worthy unite the bloodlines," it reads, "but let the unworthy beware, for the old powers serve only those who understand their true nature. To claim authority without wisdom is to invite chaos, and to seek power without spiritual connection is to court destruction." The implications are staggering. Daemon's potential rule wouldn't just have restored the Targaryen dynasty, but would have fundamentally transformed the nature of civilization in Westeros. The various factions that had opposed him hadn't just been fighting to maintain their political power, but to prevent a transformation that would have made their entire worldview obsolete. As you sit in the sacred grove, surrounded by the watchful presence of the weirwood trees, you begin to understand the full tragedy of what had been lost when Daemon died. The rightful king hadn't just been denied a throne, but the entire realm had been denied the possibility of reconnecting with spiritual traditions that might have prevented many of the disasters that had followed. The War of the Five Kings, Robert's Rebellion, even the current struggles that plague Westeros, all of them might have been avoided if the proper spiritual foundations of royal authority had been restored when Daemon had the opportunity to claim his throne. Instead, the realm had been condemned to continue struggling with the fundamental disconnection between its rulers and the deeper forces that should have guided their governance. But perhaps most troubling of all is the realization that the conspiracy against Daemon had required knowledge of these ancient truths. The various factions that had destroyed him hadn't been acting out of ignorance or political opportunism, but out of deliberate opposition to the restoration of the old powers. They had understood exactly what they were preventing, and they had chosen to condemn the realm to continued spiritual poverty, rather than allow Daemon to fulfill his destiny. As night falls over the Isle of Faces, and the weirwood trees seem to glow with their own internal light, you find yourself face to face with the magnitude of the crime that had been committed against not just Daemon Blackfyre, but against the entire realm he might have ruled. The conspiracy that destroyed him hadn't just been about succession politics or dynastic ambition, but about preventing the restoration of a form of governance that could have addressed the spiritual as well as the political needs of the people. The ancient echoes that you've traced through centuries of Targaryen history all point to the same conclusion. Daemon's death had been the pivotal moment when Westeros had turned away from its spiritual roots and committed itself to a purely materialistic approach to power and governance. Every disaster that had followed could be traced back to that fundamental choice, that moment when political expedience had triumphed over cosmic necessity. As you prepare to leave the Isle of Faces and return to the world of ordinary human concerns, you carry with you the weight of understanding that goes far beyond historical curiosity. The truth about Daemon Blackfyre isn't just about correcting an ancient injustice, but about understanding the spiritual crisis that continues to plague Westeros 3 centuries after his death. The rightful king had been more than just a man, and his destruction had been more than just a political assassination. It had been the moment when an entire civilization had chosen to sever its connection to the deeper sources of wisdom and authority that might have guided it through the troubles that lay ahead. The journey back from the Isle of Faces feels like returning from another world entirely, and in many ways, that's exactly what it is. The mystical energies that permeate that sacred place have left their mark on all of you, opening your perception to possibilities that rational minds struggle to accept. But as your boat cuts through the dark waters of the God's Eye under a canopy of stars that seem unusually bright, you carry with you knowledge that will reshape everything you thought you understood about the forces that shaped Daemon Blackfyre's fate. The revelations about the old powers and the spiritual significance of Daemon's bloodline have answered many questions, but they've also raised new ones that cut to the very heart of the conspiracy against him. If the various factions that destroyed him had possessed knowledge of these ancient truths, then their opposition hadn't been based on political opportunism or simple prejudice, but on a deliberate decision to prevent the restoration of powers they understood all too well. Back in the archives of the Citadel, Maester Qyburn produces yet another collection of documents that he's kept hidden until now, these ones dealing specifically with the individuals and institutions that had orchestrated Daemon's destruction. The evidence contained in these papers is so damning that he's wrapped them in protective spells and hidden them behind wards that would have prevented anyone without specific knowledge from even finding them. What you're about to see, he says solemnly, will shatter any remaining illusions about the nature of the conspiracy against Daemon. These documents name names, detail specific actions, and reveal motivations that go far beyond anything we've discussed so far. But they also implicate individuals and institutions that still wield enormous power in Westeros, making this knowledge incredibly dangerous to possess. The first document is a detailed report written by someone identified only as the High Septon Benedon the Blessed, addressed to a collection of recipients whose names have been carefully obscured, but whose titles suggest the highest levels of both religious and secular authority. The report details a series of meetings that took place in the years leading up to Daemon's rebellion, meetings that reveal the scope and sophistication of the conspiracy that would eventually destroy him. According to Benedon's report, the various factions opposed to Daemon had formed what they called the Sacred Order of Preservation, a secret organization dedicated to maintaining what they saw as the proper balance of power in Westeros. The order included not just religious leaders and maesters, but representatives from several of the great houses who feared that Daemon's potential rule would threaten their own positions and privileges. The document reveals that the order had been monitoring Daemon since childhood, carefully documenting his development and growing influence, while simultaneously working to undermine his position and isolate him from potential supporters. But perhaps most chilling of all, it shows that they had possessed detailed knowledge of the ancient prophecies and bloodline requirements that made Daemon such a threat to their vision of how Westeros should be governed. The bastard prince shows all the signs predicted in the ancient texts, Benedon writes. His natural authority over men, his instinctive understanding of the realm's needs, and most dangerously, his growing awareness of his true heritage, all mark him as the potential catalyst for the restoration that we have worked so hard to prevent. If he is allowed to ascend the throne, the old powers will awaken, and our carefully maintained order will crumble before forces that care nothing for the institutions we have built. The report goes on to detail specific steps that the order had taken to weaken Daemon's position and prepare for his eventual elimination. Gold had been spread liberally among lords who might otherwise have supported his cause, spreading rumors and propaganda designed to make him appear dangerous and unstable. The faith had preached sermons emphasizing the importance of legitimate succession and the dangers of allowing bastards to rise above their proper station. The maesters had subtly altered historical records to support narratives that would justify Daemon's destruction when the time came. But the most shocking revelation comes in a section of the report that details the Order's infiltration of Daemon's own inner circle. Several of his most trusted advisors and supporters had been secretly working for the conspiracy, feeding information about his plans and activities, while simultaneously influencing his decisions in ways that would make him appear more threatening and unstable to outside observers. Among the names listed as secret agents within Daemon's camp is one that sends a chill through your entire understanding of the rebellion's history. Sir Quentin Ball, known to history as Fireball, one of Daemon's most celebrated knights and supposedly one of his most loyal supporters, had been reporting on Daemon's activities to the Sacred Order of Preservation for years before the rebellion began. The implications are staggering. Fireball hadn't just been a knight who happened to support Daemon's cause, but a deliberate plant whose purpose was to monitor the rightful king and ensure that his rebellion would unfold in ways that served the conspiracy's purposes. His legendary reputation for loyalty and courage had been a carefully crafted facade, hiding his true role as one of Daemon's destroyers. Sir Brynden stares at this revelation with something approaching horror. Fireball was one of the great heroes of our cause, he whispers. My ancestors spoke of him with reverence, called him the perfect example of what a knight should be. But he was working for the enemy all along, manipulating events to ensure Daemon's destruction. How many other heroes of the rebellion were actually traitors? The document provides answers to that question that are even more disturbing than the betrayal itself. According to Benedon's report, the Sacred Order had placed agents throughout Daemon's organization, ensuring that they would be aware of his every move while simultaneously guiding his decisions toward outcomes that would justify his destruction in the eyes of history. The rebellion itself hadn't been a spontaneous uprising against an unjust king, but a carefully orchestrated tragedy designed to eliminate Daemon while making him appear to be the aggressor. Every major decision that had led to the conflict had been influenced by these hidden agents, pushing Daemon toward choices that would make peaceful resolution impossible and violent confrontation inevitable. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the conspiracy is revealed in the final section of Benedon's report, which details the Order's plans for what would happen after Daemon's death. They hadn't just wanted to eliminate the rightful king, but to ensure that his memory would be permanently tainted and that future generations would never question the justice of his destruction. Upon the bastard's death, the report reads, "We must move swiftly to control the narrative of his rebellion. The histories must portray him as an ambitious usurper whose dreams of power led him to betray his rightful king. Any evidence of his legitimate claim must be destroyed or hidden, and any who might speak in his defense must be silenced permanently. The realm must never know that we have destroyed its rightful king, lest they question the legitimacy of our chosen successor." The systematic nature of this historical revision is breathtaking in its scope and cynicism. The Sacred Order hadn't just murdered Daemon Blackfire, but had spent the following decades carefully erasing any evidence that might lead future generations to question their actions. They had rewritten chronicles, destroyed documents, and eliminated witnesses to ensure that their version of events would become the accepted truth. Your investigation reveals that this campaign of historical revision had continued for generations after Daemon's death, with successive members of the Order working to maintain the false narrative they had created. Masters had been instructed to emphasize certain aspects of the story while downplaying others, ensuring that each new generation would grow up believing the lies that justified the conspiracy's actions. But the Order's activities hadn't ended with historical revision. The documents reveal that they had also worked systematically to eliminate Daemon's surviving supporters and their descendants, ensuring that no one would remain who might possess knowledge that could threaten their carefully constructed narrative. Entire family lines had been quietly destroyed over the decades following the rebellion, their deaths made to appear accidental or attributed to other causes. The scope of this multi-generational campaign of murder and deception is almost impossible to comprehend. The Sacred Order of Preservation hadn't just destroyed Daemon Blackfire, but had spent centuries eliminating anyone who might threaten their version of history. They had turned the systematic suppression of truth into a sacred mission, convincing themselves that they were protecting the realm from dangerous knowledge. As you study these revelations, you begin to understand that the conspiracy against Daemon had been far more than just a political plot or even a spiritual conflict. It had been a fundamental assault on the concept of truth itself, an attempt to remake reality according to the conspirators' vision of how the world should work. They had decided that certain knowledge was too dangerous to exist and had devoted enormous resources to ensuring that it would be permanently suppressed. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the documents is their revelation that the Sacred Order of Preservation hadn't disbanded after achieving their goals, but had evolved into other forms that continued to operate in Westeros for generations. References to successor organizations and continuing missions suggest that the conspiracy that destroyed Daemon had established institutional frameworks that might still be active centuries later. The implications of this possibility are terrifying. If the descendants or successors of the Sacred Order were still operating in Westeros, then your investigation might have attracted their attention in ways that could prove extremely dangerous. The forces that had been willing to murder a rightful king and suppress the truth for 3 centuries wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a few historians who had stumbled upon their carefully guarded secrets. As you prepare to delve even deeper into the conspiracy's history and structure, you realize that you've crossed yet another line in your quest for truth. You're no longer just investigating historical events, but potentially confronting ongoing criminal organizations that have shaped the political and spiritual landscape of Westeros for centuries. The knowledge you possess is dangerous enough to justify extreme measures from those who want it suppressed, and you may already be marked for elimination by forces whose existence you're only beginning to understand. The weight of this realization settles over the archive chamber like a physical presence. You came to the Citadel seeking answers to historical questions, but what you found is evidence of crimes so vast and ongoing that they challenge the very foundations of everything you thought you knew about how power operates in Westeros. The truth about Daemon Blackfyre isn't just a matter of historical curiosity, but a key to understanding conspiracies that may still be actively shaping the destiny of the Seven Kingdoms. As Maester Qyburn carefully rewraps the damning documents and returns them to their hidden compartments, he speaks the question that all of you are thinking, but none have dared to voice. Now that we know the truth about the Sacred Order of Preservation and their ongoing mission to suppress dangerous knowledge, what are we going to do about it? Are we brave enough to continue this investigation knowing that we're potentially challenging forces that have been murdering truth seekers for 3 centuries? The answer to that question will determine not just the future of your investigation, but possibly your very survival in a world where the pursuit of truth has been defined as treason by those who profit from lies. The decision to continue your investigation despite the mounting evidence of ongoing danger comes not from courage, but from a growing understanding that the truth you've uncovered demands to be revealed, regardless of the personal cost. The Sacred Order of Preservation and its successor organizations have held Westeros in the grip of a carefully orchestrated deception for 3 centuries, and their crimes against Daemon Blackfyre represent just the beginning of a pattern of manipulation that has shaped every major event in the realm's history since his death. As you delve deeper into the hidden archives that Maester Qyburn has revealed, a picture emerges of systematic interference in the natural course of Westerosi history that extends far beyond the destruction of a single rightful king. The conspiracy that eliminated Daemon had established precedents and institutional frameworks that had been used again and again to prevent the emergence of leaders who might threaten the carefully maintained balance of power that served the Order's interests. The documents you uncover reveal a pattern of manipulation that stretches across centuries, with the Order's influence visible in every major succession crisis, religious conflict, and political upheaval that has plagued the Seven Kingdoms. They had perfected the art of appearing to support the natural order while actually working to corrupt and control it from within, ensuring that no ruler would ever again possess the spiritual authority and popular legitimacy that might allow them to challenge the Order's vision of how society should function. One particularly damning collection of correspondence details the Order's role in the decline and eventual extinction of the Targaryen dragons. According to these documents, the loss of the dragons hadn't been a natural consequence of inbreeding or environmental changes, but the result of deliberate sabotage carried out over multiple generations. The Order had understood that the dragons represented more than just weapons or symbols of royal power, but were living conduits for the old powers that gave the Targaryens their spiritual authority. The letters describe a systematic campaign to weaken the dragon bloodline through careful manipulation of breeding programs, the introduction of toxins into their food and environment, and most disturbingly, the deliberate corruption of the mystical bonds that connected the dragons to their riders. Maesters working for the Order had used their positions as advisors to royal families to ensure that each generation of dragons would be weaker than the last, until finally the great beasts died out entirely. The extinction of the dragons marked the completion of our first great working, one letter reads. With their death, the Targaryens lost their last connection to the powers that had originally justified their rule. From this point forward, they will rule through force and tradition alone, making them dependent on the very institutions we control. They will never again pose a threat to the Order we have worked so carefully to establish. But the Order's manipulation hadn't stopped with the dragons. The documents reveal their involvement in countless other events that had shaped Westerosi history, always working to prevent the emergence of leaders who might possess the wisdom, authority, or spiritual connection necessary to challenge their control. Robert's Rebellion, the War of the Five Kings, even the various religious upheavals that had periodically convulsed the realm, all showed signs of the Order's hidden influence. The scope of this multi-generational conspiracy is almost impossible to comprehend. For 3 centuries, the Sacred Order of Preservation and its successors had been the true power behind the Iron Throne, manipulating kings and queens, lords and commoners to serve their vision of how Westeros should be governed. They had turned the entire realm into a carefully managed experiment in social control, with themselves as the unseen architects of every major political development. Your investigation takes you to hidden chambers beneath the Sept of Baelor, where the Order had maintained its headquarters for generations. Here, in caverns that predate the construction of the Great Sept above, you discover the physical evidence of their ongoing operations. The walls are covered with detailed maps of Westeros showing the locations of their agents and assets, updated regularly to reflect changing political conditions. The maps reveal a network of influence that reaches into every castle, every sept, every major institution in the Seven Kingdoms. Thousands of individuals, most of them unaware of the true nature of their involvement, have been working to advance the Order's agenda while believing they were serving their own interests or those of their legitimate superiors. The conspiracy has grown so vast and pervasive that it has become virtually indistinguishable from the normal functioning of Westerosi society itself. In the deepest chamber of this hidden complex, you discover what appears to be the Order's central archive, containing detailed records of every operation they have conducted over the past 3 centuries. The scope of their activities is breathtaking in its ambition and horrifying in its callous disregard for human suffering. They have toppled dynasties, started wars, manipulated religious movements, and eliminated thousands of individuals whose only crime was possessing knowledge or authority that threatened their carefully maintained control. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery comes when you find detailed plans for future operations, suggesting that the Order's work is far from complete. According to these documents, the destruction of Daemon Blackfyre had been just the first phase of a much larger project aimed at fundamentally restructuring Westerosi society, according to their vision of perfect order and stability. The third open loop that has been building throughout your investigation finally begins to resolve as you study these future plans. The Order's ultimate goal hadn't been simply to maintain their own power, but to create a society so thoroughly controlled and manipulated that concepts like spiritual authority, natural legitimacy, and divine right would become meaningless. They wanted to replace the mystical foundations of royal authority with purely rational systems of control that they could manage and direct. According to their own documents, the Order believed that the old powers and the spiritual traditions associated with them represented dangerous sources of unpredictability that had to be eliminated if society was to achieve true stability. They saw themselves as enlightened guardians protecting humanity from the chaos and destruction that they believed would inevitably result from allowing mystical forces to influence political affairs. But their definition of stability was revealing in its emphasis on control and predictability, rather than justice or human flourishing. The perfect society they envisioned was one in which every individual knew their place and accepted it without question, where change occurred only according to carefully managed processes that served the Order's interests, and where no one possessed the knowledge or authority necessary to challenge the systems they had established. The documents reveal that this vision of perfect order had driven every major decision the Order had made since its founding. They had destroyed Daemon, not because he threatened any specific political arrangement, but because he represented the possibility of a different kind of authority entirely, one that derived its legitimacy from sources beyond their control or understanding. As you study the intricate plans and detailed timelines that the Order had developed for their ongoing operations, you begin to understand that your investigation has uncovered far more than a historical injustice. The conspiracy that destroyed Daemon Blackfyre had evolved into something resembling a shadow government that had been quietly directing the affairs of Westeros for centuries, always working to prevent the emergence of leadership that might challenge their vision of how society should function. The personal stakes of your investigation suddenly become clear as you realize that the knowledge you now possess makes you an existential threat to an organization that has survived and thrived for 3 centuries by eliminating anyone who might expose their activities. The Order has vast resources, countless agents, and a proven willingness to commit any crime necessary to protect their secrets. Your discovery of their true nature and ongoing operations virtually guarantees that they will take action to silence you before you can reveal what you've learned. But the broader implications of your discoveries extend far beyond personal danger. If the Order's influence has been as pervasive as the documents suggest, then virtually every aspect of Westerosi society has been shaped by their manipulation. The wars, the famines, the religious conflicts, the dynastic struggles, all of them may have been deliberately orchestrated to serve the Order's agenda of control and social engineering. The realization that free will itself may be largely illusory in a realm where every major decision is influenced by hidden conspirators sends a chill through your understanding of what it means to live in Westeros. How many of the choices that individuals believe they are making freely are actually the result of careful manipulation by forces they never knew existed? How much of what people accept as natural or inevitable is actually the product of deliberate social engineering carried out by an organization whose very existence remains secret? As you prepare to uncover the final layers of this ancient conspiracy, you carry with you the weight of knowledge that threatens to fundamentally alter your understanding of reality itself. The truth about Daemon Blackfyre has led you to discoveries that extend far beyond historical curiosity into realms of ongoing political significance that could reshape the present as dramatically as they explain the past. The rightful king who died at Redgrass Field hadn't just been denied a crown, but had been sacrificed to protect a system of hidden control that has shaped the destiny of millions of people over the course of 3 centuries. His destruction had marked the moment when Westeros had unknowingly surrendered its freedom to forces that would use that freedom to gradually eliminate every possibility of genuine choice or authentic authority. The conspiracy that destroyed Daemon Blackfyre wasn't just about preventing the restoration of the old powers, but about replacing those powers with something far more sinister and controlling. The Order hadn't just wanted to maintain the status quo, but to create a new kind of society where the very concepts that made rebellion or resistance possible would be systematically eliminated from human consciousness. As night falls over the hidden chambers beneath the Sept of Bakelor, you find yourself surrounded by evidence of crimes so vast and ongoing that they challenge the foundations of everything you thought you knew about the nature of power, authority, and freedom in Westeros. The investigation that began with simple historical curiosity has evolved into something that threatens to expose the hidden architecture of control that has shaped the realm for centuries. Tomorrow you will need to make the most important decision of your investigation. Armed with knowledge that could literally reshape the political landscape of Westeros, you must decide whether to risk everything by attempting to expose the truth or to retreat into silence and allow the conspiracy to continue its work unopposed. The weight of that choice presses down on you like the accumulated guilt of 3 centuries of systematic deception and control. The weight of the knowledge you've uncovered demands more than just understanding. It requires wisdom to know how such dangerous truths should be handled. As dawn breaks over King's Landing and the first light of morning filters through the hidden chambers beneath the Sept of Baelor, you realize that your investigation has reached a crossroads that will determine not just your own fate, but potentially the future of the entire 7 kingdoms. The decision to seek additional guidance comes not from uncertainty about what you've discovered, but from recognition that the magnitude of the conspiracy you've uncovered requires perspectives that extend beyond your own limited experience. The Sacred Order of Preservation has operated in shadows for 3 centuries, and confronting such an entrenched and powerful organization will require allies who possess knowledge and resources that you cannot hope to gather alone. Your first companion in this expanded quest for wisdom is someone Maester Qyburn introduces only as the Ghost of High Heart, an ancient woman whose appearance seems to shift and waver as if she exists only partially in the physical world. She claims to have lived through the entire period since Daemon's death, sustained by forces that she describes vaguely as debts owed by the old powers to those who serve their cause faithfully. "I have been waiting for someone to uncover these truths," she says, in a voice that sounds like wind through ancient trees. "The spirits of the wronged dead have no rest while their stories remain untold, and Daemon Blackfire's ghost has wandered the halls of power for 3 centuries, seeking someone brave enough to speak his name with proper reverence. You have done well to come this far, but the path ahead requires understanding that goes beyond documents and evidence." The ghost speaks of currents that flow beneath the surface of political events, forces that shape the destiny of nations through means that rational minds struggle to comprehend. According to her, the conspiracy against Daemon had succeeded not just through political maneuvering and institutional control, but by severing the realm's connection to spiritual traditions that had previously provided guidance and protection to both rulers and ruled. The Order understood something that even their victims did not fully grasp, she explains, her eyes seeming to focus on things that exist beyond the visible world. Power in Westeros had always flowed through channels that connected the physical and spiritual realms. Kings ruled not just because they commanded armies or controlled resources, but because they served as conduits for forces that cared more about justice and wisdom than mere political advantage. Her words provide context for the ancient documents you've studied, explaining why the union of dragon blood with the bloodline of the first men had been seen as such a threat by those who opposed Daemon. The restoration he represented wouldn't have just changed the identity of the person sitting on the Iron Throne, but would have fundamentally altered the nature of royal authority itself, reconnecting it to sources of legitimacy that existed beyond human manipulation or control. Your second guide in this gathering of wisdom is a man who introduces himself simply as Septon Maribald, though his deep knowledge of theological matters and his obvious familiarity with the inner workings of the faith suggest that his actual identity and position are far more significant than his humble title implies. He speaks of the spiritual crisis that has plagued Westeros since Daemon's death, a crisis that manifests not just in religious conflicts, but in the general sense of purposelessness and moral confusion that has characterized the realm's political life for centuries. The faith has been complicit in terrible crimes, he admits with obvious pain. We convinced ourselves that we were protecting the realm from dangerous knowledge, but what we actually did was sever the people's connection to the sources of wisdom that might have guided them through the trials that lay ahead. By opposing Daemon, we helped to create a spiritual vacuum that has been filled by forces far more destructive than anything we feared from the old powers. Septon Maribald produces texts that detail the theological justifications that had been developed to support the Order's actions, revealing how carefully the conspiracy had worked to convince religious leaders that opposing Daemon was a sacred duty rather than a crime against divine justice. The faith's leadership had been systematically deceived about the true nature of what they were supporting, led to believe that they were protecting traditional values when they were actually helping to destroy the spiritual foundations that had given those values their meaning. The theological documents reveal the sophisticated nature of the Order's manipulation, showing how they had used genuine religious concerns about pagan influences and mystical practices to disguise their real agenda of eliminating spiritual authority that might challenge their control. They had convinced the faith's leadership that the old powers were demonic influences that needed to be suppressed, when in reality, these forces represented the divine connections that had originally sanctified royal authority and provided spiritual guidance to the realm. But perhaps the most valuable perspective comes from your third guide, a figure who emerges from the shadows of the chamber with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to moving unseen through the world. He identifies himself as a faceless man, though he makes it clear that he speaks not for the House of Black and White, but for older traditions that predate even that ancient organization. Death has many faces, he says in a voice that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But truth has only one. The order you have uncovered has spent centuries dealing in false deaths and artificial truths, but they have never understood that such deceptions carry a price that must eventually be paid. The debts they have accumulated in the spiritual realm are vast beyond measure, and the time of reckoning approaches whether they acknowledge it or not. The Faceless Man speaks of patterns that extend far beyond the political history of Westeros, connecting Daemon's story to cycles of destruction and renewal that have played out across the known world since the dawn of civilization. According to his account, the forces that destroyed the rightful king represent a recurring manifestation of humanity's tendency to choose comfortable lies over difficult truths, security over freedom, and control over authentic spiritual growth. Every civilization faces the choice that Westeros faced when Daemon raised his banner, the Faceless Man explains. They can embrace the difficult path of genuine spiritual development with all the uncertainty and challenge that entails, or they can choose the false comfort of systems that promise stability at the cost of growth. The Order represents the inevitable result of choosing security over truth, and their influence will continue to grow until someone has the courage to expose their deceptions to the light of day. As these three guides share their knowledge and perspectives, a strategy begins to emerge for how the truth about Daemon Blackfyre and the ongoing conspiracy might be revealed without triggering the kind of violent backlash that could destroy both the messengers and their message. The approach they recommend is subtle and gradual, designed to work with the natural currents of spiritual awakening that they claim are already beginning to stir throughout the realm. The Ghost of High Heart speaks of preparing the ground through careful revelation of smaller truths that will help people understand the larger patterns of deception that have shaped their lives. Rather than attempting to expose the entire conspiracy at once, which would likely be dismissed as fantasy or madness, the plan involves gradually building awareness of the spiritual dimensions of political authority and the importance of legitimacy that extends beyond mere legal or military power. Septon Maribald outlines how the faith itself might be gradually reformed through exposure to the theological implications of what has been discovered. Many within the religious hierarchy have grown uncomfortable with the faith's political entanglements and would welcome a return to more authentic spiritual practices, especially if they could be shown how their current path has led them away from their original mission of serving divine rather than temporal powers. The Faceless Man's contribution to the strategy focuses on the practical aspects of protection and survival for those who would undertake the dangerous work of revealing these truths. He speaks of networks that exist parallel to the Order's influence, groups and individuals who have maintained their independence from the conspiracy's control and who might serve as allies in the struggle to restore authentic spiritual authority to the realm. But all three guides emphasize that the ultimate success of any effort to expose the truth will depend not on political maneuvering or institutional reform, but on spiritual awakening among the people themselves. The conspiracy has succeeded for so long because it has convinced people to accept limitations on their own spiritual development, to seek security and comfort rather than growth and truth. Breaking free from that conditioning will require individual courage and commitment that cannot be imposed from above but must emerge from within. As your counsel of wisdom continues through the long hours of the morning, you begin to understand that revealing the truth about Daemon Blackfyre is not just about correcting a historical injustice, but about participating in a much larger process of spiritual awakening that has implications far beyond the borders of Westeros. The forces that destroyed the rightful king represent patterns of deception and control that manifest throughout human civilization, and confronting them successfully requires not just courage and knowledge, but wisdom that connects individual action to larger cosmic purposes. The Ghost of High Heart concludes the gathering by sharing a vision that she claims to have received from the spirits of those who died in service to Daemon's cause. According to this vision, The truth about the rightful king will eventually be revealed, but the timing and manner of that revelation will determine whether it serves to heal the spiritual wounds that have plagued the realm, or simply creates new forms of conflict and suffering. The dead can wait, she says, with the patience of one who has already waited centuries for justice. What matters is not when the truth is spoken, but how it is spoken, and whether those who hear it are ready to understand its deeper implications. Daemon's vindication will come, but it must come in a way that serves the highest good rather than merely satisfying the desire for revenge or recognition. Septon Maribald adds his own perspective on the spiritual dimensions of the challenge ahead. The faith has been wounded by its participation in these crimes, but wounds can heal if they are properly tended. What we need is not destruction of existing institutions, but their gradual transformation through exposure to truths that they have been prevented from understanding. The Order's power depends on keeping people divided and confused about spiritual matters. Unity and clarity will dissolve their influence more effectively than any direct confrontation. The Faceless Man's final words carry both warning and encouragement. You have uncovered truths that powerful forces have killed to keep hidden, and they will not hesitate to kill again if they perceive you as a threat. But truth itself is more powerful than any conspiracy, and those who serve it faithfully will find that they are protected by forces that extend far beyond the reach of temporal authority. Trust in the rightness of your cause, but do not let that trust make you careless about the very real dangers you face. As the gathering of wisdom concludes, and your guides prepare to return to whatever shadows they emerged from, you find yourself equipped not just with knowledge about the conspiracy that destroyed Daemon Blackfire, but with understanding of how that knowledge might be used to serve purposes that extend far beyond historical curiosity. The path ahead remains dangerous and uncertain, but it no longer feels like a journey you must undertake alone. The truth about the rightful king has allies in unexpected places, and the spiritual forces that he represented have not been permanently destroyed by 3 centuries of systematic suppression. The conspiracy may have succeeded in eliminating Daemon himself, but they have not succeeded in eliminating the needs and longings that his potential rule might have addressed. Those needs continue to exist within the hearts of people throughout the realm, waiting for someone brave enough to speak the words that will help them understand what they have lost and what might still be reclaimed. The wisdom gathered from your mystical counselors provides clarity about the path forward, but it also brings with it a profound understanding of the magnitude of what you're preparing to undertake. As you return to the familiar confines of the Citadel's archives, the weight of accumulated knowledge seems to press down on you with almost physical force. You carry within your mind secrets that could reshape the political landscape of Westeros, but you also carry the burden of understanding just how dangerous those secrets are to possess. The days following your gathering of wisdom are marked by a growing sense of being watched. Shadows seem deeper than they should be, and ordinary sounds take on ominous significance. Ravens perch on windowsills longer than usual, their black eyes seeming to study your movements with unnatural intelligence. Servants who have worked in the Citadel for decades suddenly appear in places where you've never seen them before, always finding reasons to linger near wherever you happen to be conducting your research. Maester Qyburn confirms your suspicions about the surveillance. The Order has resources throughout the realm, he says quietly, as you examine documents in a chamber that he's warded against eavesdropping. They've had 3 centuries to place their agents in every institution that matters, and the Citadel is certainly no exception. We must assume that they know about our investigation, though they may not yet understand the full scope of what we've discovered. The realization that you're operating under hostile observation adds a new dimension of urgency to your work. Every document you examine, every conversation you have, every decision you make is potentially being reported to forces that have demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats to their carefully maintained control. The intellectual exercise of historical research has evolved into something resembling a deadly game of strategy, where the slightest misstep could prove fatal. But perhaps more troubling than the external surveillance is the internal conflict that your discoveries have created within your own mind. The evidence you've gathered proves beyond doubt that Daemon Blackfyre was the rightful king of Westeros, and that his destruction was orchestrated by forces that continue to shape the realm's destiny 3 centuries later. This knowledge demands action, but taking that action could trigger consequences that extend far beyond your own personal safety. The ghost of High Heart's warnings about the importance of timing and manner echo in your thoughts as you struggle with the moral complexities of your situation. Revealing the truth about Daemon could vindicate his memory and expose ongoing injustices, but it could also destabilize institutions that, however flawed, provide some measure of order and stability to millions of people. The cure for the conspiracy's influence might prove more destructive than the disease itself, at least in the short term. Sir Brynden faces his own version of this moral dilemma. The evidence you've uncovered proves that his ancestors were fighting for the rightful king rather than supporting a usurper, vindicating centuries of family shame and providing the honor his bloodline has sought for generations. But that vindication comes with knowledge of ongoing crimes that demand justice, even though seeking that justice could prove suicidal for those brave enough to attempt it. I've spent my entire life believing that my family carried the burden of supporting the wrong side in a just war, he confesses during one of your late-night conversations. Learning that we were actually the ones fighting for justice, while our enemies were the criminals and traitors, should bring me satisfaction. But instead, I find myself terrified by the implications of what we've discovered. How do you seek justice against forces that have been powerful enough to reshape history itself? The question haunts all of your deliberations as you prepare for what may be the final phase of your investigation. The evidence you've gathered is overwhelming in its scope and damning in its implications, but evidence alone is meaningless without the power to act on it. The Sacred Order of Preservation and its successors have spent centuries eliminating anyone who might threaten their control, and they possess resources that dwarf anything available to a small group of researchers operating out of the Citadel's archives. Your study of the Order's methods reveals the sophisticated nature of the threat you face. They don't simply murder their enemies outright, but carefully orchestrate the destruction of anyone who opposes them in ways that appear natural or accidental. Researchers die in fires that consume their work, along with their lives. Whistleblowers succumb to sudden illnesses that leave no trace of foul play. Potential allies discover that their families face unexpected hardships that can only be resolved through cooperation with forces they don't fully understand. The psychological pressure of operating under this kind of threat begins to manifest in ways that affect your ability to function effectively. Sleep becomes elusive as your mind races through possible scenarios and contingencies. Concentration wavers as you find yourself constantly scanning your surroundings for signs of danger. The simple act of walking through familiar corridors becomes an exercise in hypervigilance as you evaluate every person you encounter as a potential threat. But perhaps most insidious of all is the growing temptation to simply abandon the investigation and retreat into the comfortable ignorance that had characterized your life before stumbling upon these dangerous truths. The knowledge you've gained has brought with it responsibilities that you never sought and burdens that you're not sure you're strong enough to bear. The option of destroying your evidence and forgetting everything you've learned becomes increasingly attractive as the dangers mount and the prospects for successful action seem increasingly remote. Maester Qyburn recognizes the signs of the psychological pressure that threatens to overwhelm your small group of investigators. He's seen it before in others who have stumbled upon fragments of the truth about the Order's activities, and he knows how easy it is for good people to convince themselves that some secrets are better left buried. The Order's greatest weapon isn't violence or corruption, he explains during one of your darkest moments. It's despair. They want you to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you've discovered. They want you to believe that the forces arrayed against you are so powerful that resistance is futile. They've perfected the art of making their enemies defeat themselves through discouragement and fear. His words provide perspective that helps you understand the nature of the spiritual battle you're fighting as much as the political one. The conspiracy that destroyed Daemon Blackfire has succeeded for so long, not just because of its material resources, but because it has convinced potential opponents that victory is impossible. By making their power appear absolute and their control inevitable, they have discouraged resistance before it can even begin to organize effectively. But understanding the psychological dimensions of the threat also provides insights into potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited. The Order's power depends on maintaining the illusion of inevitability and the appearance of natural authority. Exposing them as mere mortals engaged in criminal conspiracy rather than representatives of some higher order would undermine the mystique that protects them from serious challenge. The realization that you're engaged in a battle for the realm's spiritual as well as political future provides new motivation for continuing the investigation, despite the mounting dangers. The forces that destroyed Daemon represent more than just a historical injustice or even an ongoing criminal conspiracy. They represent humanity's tendency to choose security over growth, comfort over truth, and control over authentic spiritual development. Your research takes on new urgency as you begin to understand that the window of opportunity for effective action may be closing. The Order has had 3 centuries to consolidate their control and eliminate potential threats, but they may also have grown complacent about their security. The current generation of conspirators may not fully understand the foundations of their power or the nature of the forces they're attempting to control. Recent events throughout the Seven Kingdoms suggest that the spiritual vacuum created by the Order's systematic suppression of authentic authority has begun to manifest in increasingly destructive ways. Civil wars, religious extremism, social breakdown, and general lawlessness all point to a realm that has lost its connection to the sources of wisdom and guidance that might help it navigate the challenges of a complex world. The signs are there for those who know how to read them. Common folk throughout the realm report dreams and visions that seem to be calling them towards some undefined purpose. Ancient sites that have been abandoned for centuries suddenly begin to draw pilgrims and seekers. Even among the nobility, there's a growing sense that the traditional sources of authority and guidance have somehow lost their legitimacy and effectiveness. These manifestations suggest that the spiritual forces that Daemon might have channeled are beginning to stir again, seeking new outlets for expression after centuries of suppression. The old powers that the Order has worked so hard to eliminate may not be as dormant as their enemies believe, and the approaching revelation of truth about the rightful king might serve as a catalyst for their reawakening. But the same forces that offer hope for eventual justice also present immediate dangers for anyone who attempts to serve as their instrument. The Order has survived for 3 centuries by eliminating threats before they can fully manifest, and they possess both the knowledge and the ruthlessness necessary to prevent any restoration of the spiritual authority they have worked so hard to suppress. As you prepare for the final phase of your investigation, you carry with you the understanding that you're not just seeking to expose historical crimes, but participating in a cosmic struggle between forces of truth and deception that extends far beyond the borders of Westeros. The outcome of that struggle will be determined not just by the strength of the evidence you've gathered, but by your willingness to serve purposes that transcend personal safety or individual recognition. The shadow of truth falls across the realm, like the shadow of a great bird wheeling overhead, and those with eyes to see can sense the approaching moment when secrets that have been hidden for centuries will finally be revealed. Whether that revelation brings healing or destruction will depend on the courage and wisdom of those who have been chosen to serve as its instruments. The rightful king waits in death for the vindication that was denied him in life, and the realm waits unknowingly for the restoration of authentic authority that might guide it through the trials that lie ahead. The burden of making that restoration possible rests now on the shoulders of a small group of investigators who have stumbled upon truths that powerful forces would kill to keep hidden. Tomorrow you will take the final steps in your investigation, uncovering the last secrets that will complete your understanding of the conspiracy that has shaped Westeros for 3 centuries. Armed with that knowledge, you will face the ultimate choice between safety and service, between the comfortable lies that have sustained the realm and the dangerous truths that might transform it. The final piece of the puzzle comes to you not through careful research or dangerous infiltration, but through a dream that feels more real than waking life. As you sleep fitfully in your chamber within the citadel, surrounded by wards that Maester Qyburn has placed to protect you from both physical and spiritual intrusion, you find yourself standing in a great hall that exists somewhere between memory and vision, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The hall is filled with figures from across the centuries of Westerosi history, all of them connected in some way to the great deception that has shaped the realm since Daemon Blackfire's death. Kings and queens, lords and ladies, maesters and septons, all of them bearing the weight of choices that have led to this moment of ultimate revelation. At the center of the hall, seated on a throne that seems to be carved from living shadow, sits a figure whose face shifts and changes, but whose presence radiates the kind of authority that comes from wielding power over the hidden currents of history itself. "You have come far in your quest for truth," the figure says, and its voice carries the accumulated weight of 3 centuries of carefully orchestrated deception. But truth is a more complex thing than you have imagined. What you call conspiracy, we call necessity. What you call crime, we call service to a higher order. You seek to expose us as criminals, but we are the guardians of stability, the architects of peace, the protectors of civilization itself. As the figure speaks, the hall fills with images that illustrate the scope and purpose of the sacred order of preservation's activities over the centuries. You see the wars that were prevented, the conflicts that were resolved, the disasters that were averted through their careful manipulation of events. The order presents itself not as a criminal conspiracy, but as a secret government that has worked tirelessly to protect humanity from the chaos and destruction that would result from allowing spiritual forces to operate without proper guidance and control. Daemon Blackfire represented chaos, the figure continues, its form now resolving into the familiar features of Grand Maester Mellows, the man who had served as one of the Order's founding members, not because he was evil or corrupt, but because he embodied forces that we could not predict or control. The old powers that would have flowed through him were wild and dangerous, capable of reshaping reality in ways that could have destroyed everything we had worked to build. The vision shows you scenes of what might have been if Daemon had been allowed to claim his throne. You see a Westeros transformed by mystical energies that blur the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, where dragons soar through skies that shimmer with aurora-like lights, where the voices of the dead can be heard giving counsel to the living, where the very landscape responds to the emotional and spiritual state of its rulers. But the vision also shows the dangers that such transformation might have brought. Ancient grudges awakening with supernatural power behind them. Long-dead conflicts resuming as spirits gain the ability to influence physical events. The careful balance between the natural and supernatural worlds dissolving into chaos as forces beyond human understanding reshape reality according to principles that mortal minds cannot comprehend. "We chose order over chaos," Grand Maester Mellows explains, his image now joined by those of High Septon Benedon and other founding members of the Order. "We chose predictability over mystery, control over wild freedom. Yes, we destroyed the rightful king, but we saved the realm from destruction by forces that would have cared nothing for human suffering or mortal concerns." But even as the Order's leaders present their justifications, other figures begin to appear in the hall. Daemon Blackfire himself steps forward from the shadows, bearing Blackfire's sword and wearing a crown that seems to be woven from starlight and shadow. Behind him marched the countless victims of the Order's activities over the centuries, all of them bearing witness to the true cost of the stability that the conspiracy claims to have preserved. They speak of order, Daemon says, his voice carrying the authority of one who was born to rule but died before he could fulfill his destiny. But what they created was not order, but stagnation, not peace, but the peace of the grave. They preserved stability by killing everything that might have grown or changed or evolved beyond their ability to control. The rightful king gestures to the figures that surround him, and you recognize among them the faces of countless individuals who had been eliminated over the centuries for the crime of possessing knowledge or authority that threatened the Order's control. Historians who had uncovered inconvenient truths, religious leaders who had preached authentic spiritual development, political figures who had possessed the charisma or legitimacy that might have challenged the carefully maintained balance of power. Look upon the true cost of their order, Daemon continues, and the hall fills with scenes of the suffering that the Order's activities have caused. Families destroyed by carefully orchestrated tragedies, communities devastated by wars that were started to eliminate inconvenient leaders, entire bloodlines extinguished to prevent the emergence of individuals who might have posed threats to the conspiracy's control. But perhaps most damning of all are the scenes of spiritual desolation that the Order's success has created throughout Westeros. You see a realm where people have lost connection to the sources of meaning and purpose that might have guided them through life's challenges, where religious faith has been reduced to empty ritual divorced from authentic spiritual experience, where political authority rests on nothing more substantial than force and tradition, creating a constant undercurrent of resentment and instability. The vision shows you the true scope of what has been lost through the Order's systematic suppression of spiritual authority. Not just the life of one rightful king, but the possibility of a civilization that might have found ways to balance material progress with spiritual development, individual freedom with collective responsibility, human ambition with cosmic wisdom. The whisper that was lost in time. You find yourself saying, remembering the fragment that had first drawn you to this investigation has grown into a storm across eternity. As the words leave your lips, the vision begins to shift and change, showing you not just what has been lost, but what might still be recovered. The spiritual forces that the Order has worked so hard to suppress have not been destroyed, but only driven underground. Like seeds waiting for the proper conditions to sprout, they remain dormant within the collective consciousness of the realm, ready to emerge when the time is right and the proper catalyst appears. The ultimate revelation comes not as a single dramatic moment, but as a gradual understanding that builds like dawn breaking over a vast landscape. The sacred order of preservation was never really about preserving anything at all, but about preventing the natural evolution of human consciousness toward greater spiritual maturity and wisdom. They had convinced themselves that they were protecting civilization, but what they were actually protecting was their own power and the comfortable illusions that sustained it. The conspiracy that destroyed Daemon Blackfire had been just the beginning of a much larger project aimed at preventing humanity from developing the spiritual sophistication that would make their methods of control obsolete. They had worked for centuries to keep people dependent on external authorities rather than developing their own capacity for wisdom and discernment. They had systematically eliminated every influence that might have helped individuals or communities become more self-reliant, more spiritually mature, more capable of governing themselves according to principles that transcended mere political expedience. But the vision also reveals the inherent instability of the Order's approach. By suppressing natural spiritual development, they had created pressures that would eventually find release in ways that they could not predict or control. The very success of their efforts to maintain stability had made the eventual breakdown of their system more catastrophic when it finally occurred. As the vision reaches its climax, you see the threads of destiny that connect your investigation to the larger patterns of spiritual awakening that are beginning to stir throughout the realm. Your discovery of the truth about Daemon Blackfire is not an isolated event, but part of a much larger process of revelation that will eventually expose all of the Order's carefully guarded secrets. The rightful king's vindication is coming, but it will come as part of a transformation that extends far beyond correcting historical injustices. The spiritual forces that would have flowed through him are beginning to manifest through other channels, working through countless individuals who are awakening to their own capacity for wisdom and authentic authority. The Order's power is breaking down not because of any single revelation or dramatic confrontation, but because the consciousness that sustained it is evolving beyond their ability to manipulate or control. People throughout the realm are beginning to hunger for something more meaningful than the empty security that the conspiracy has offered them, and that hunger is creating opportunities for the kind of authentic spiritual development that the Order has worked so hard to prevent. As the vision fades and you find yourself back in your chamber within the Citadel, you carry with you an understanding that extends far beyond the historical facts you came here to uncover. The truth about Daemon Blackfire is important not just because it corrects an ancient injustice, but because it serves as a key to understanding the spiritual crisis that has plagued Westeros for centuries, and the transformation that is now beginning to address that crisis. The dying king's final words that would drown Westeros in blood have indeed created a river of suffering that flows still, but that same river is now beginning to carry the seeds of renewal and restoration that will eventually wash away the foundations of the conspiracy that has controlled the realm for so long. You understand now that your role is not to single-handedly expose and destroy the sacred order of preservation, but to serve as one of many instruments through which the truth will gradually emerge into the light. The rightful king's story will be told, but it will be told as part of a larger story of spiritual awakening that is already beginning to unfold throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The conspiracy that seemed so powerful and entrenched when you first began to uncover its existence is actually in the final stages of a centuries-long process of self-destruction. By suppressing the natural spiritual development of the realm, they have created conditions that make their eventual downfall inevitable. The only question now is whether that downfall will come through gradual transformation or catastrophic collapse, and that question will be answered by the choices made by individuals like yourself, who have been called to serve the cause of truth in whatever way their circumstances allow. As dawn breaks over Old Town and the first rays of sunlight filter through your chamber window, you prepare to begin the work of sharing what you have learned, knowing that you are participating in something far larger and more significant than you had ever imagined when this investigation began. The understanding that flows from your visionary encounter with the true scope of the conspiracy transforms not just your knowledge of the past, but your perception of the present and your hopes for the future. As you emerge from your chamber to rejoin Maester Qyburn and Ser Brynden, you carry with you a sense of profound resolution that extends far beyond the satisfaction of having solved a historical mystery. The truth about Daemon Blackfire has revealed itself to be not just the story of one wronged king, but the key to understanding the spiritual crisis that has shaped Westeros for 3 centuries and the healing that is now beginning to emerge. Your companions sense the change in you immediately, recognizing in your bearing the weight of ultimate understanding, coupled with the peace that comes from knowing one's proper role in events that extend far beyond individual ambition or desire. The investigation that began with simple curiosity about historical inconsistencies has evolved into something resembling a spiritual mission, though one that must be carried out through entirely earthly means. You've seen it, haven't you? Maester Qyburn asks quietly as you settle into the familiar surroundings of the archive chamber. The full scope of what we've been uncovering. Not just the crimes that were committed, but the purpose that those crimes served and the transformation that their exposure will catalyze. You nod, finding that words seem inadequate to convey the magnitude of what has been revealed to you. The Sacred Order of Preservation's conspiracy against Daemon had been vast and sophisticated, but it had also been fundamentally unstable from the very beginning. By attempting to suppress spiritual forces that were integral to human development, they had created pressures that would eventually find release in ways that no amount of control or manipulation could prevent. The third and final open loop that has driven your investigation finally resolves as you share with your companions the ultimate truth about who had really benefited from Daemon's destruction and why they had been willing to risk so much to achieve it. The Order hadn't been working to preserve any existing institution or tradition, but to prevent the emergence of a form of consciousness that would have made their methods of control obsolete. Daemon's potential rule would have catalyzed a transformation in human awareness that would have rendered the entire concept of external authority less relevant as people developed their own capacity for wisdom and discernment. The conspiracy against him had been motivated not by desire to maintain political power, but by desperate fear of spiritual evolution that would have eliminated the need for the kind of paternalistic control that the Order represented. But the vision has also revealed that this transformation could not be permanently prevented, only delayed. The spiritual forces that would have flowed through Daemon had not been destroyed by his death, but had simply found other channels through which to manifest. 3 centuries of suppression had not eliminated these forces, but had only built up pressure that was now beginning to find release through countless individuals throughout the realm who were awakening to their own spiritual potential. Sir Brendan receives this revelation with a mixture of vindication and profound sadness. His family's shame has been not just erased but transformed into honor, as their support for Daemon is revealed to have been support for principles that transcend political loyalty and touch the deepest purposes of human existence. But that honor comes with the burden of understanding just how much has been lost through the Order's success and how much suffering could have been prevented if the rightful king had been allowed to fulfill his destiny. 300 years, he whispers, staring at the documents that have revealed the scope of his ancestors' sacrifice. 300 years of spiritual poverty, of disconnection from the sources of wisdom that might have guided the realm through all the trials that followed. My family died fighting not just for a king, but for the possibility of a civilization that might have learned to balance power with wisdom, ambition with compassion, individual freedom with collective responsibility. The emotional weight of this understanding settles over all of you as you contemplate the magnitude of what has been revealed. Daemon's death had marked the moment when Westeros had turned away from its spiritual destiny and committed itself to a purely materialistic approach to civilization. Every disaster that had followed, every war and conflict and breakdown of order, could be traced back to that fundamental choice to suppress rather than develop the spiritual capacities that might have provided guidance and wisdom for navigating complex challenges. But the resolution also brings with it a sense of hope that had been absent from your investigation until now. The vision has revealed that the transformation Daemon might have catalyzed is beginning to manifest anyway, working through different channels, but ultimately serving the same purpose of elevating human consciousness toward greater maturity and wisdom. The Order's apparent success in controlling events has actually prepared the ground for a spiritual awakening that will be far more profound and comprehensive than anything that could have been achieved through the authority of a single ruler, no matter how gifted or well-intentioned. Your task now is not to single-handedly expose and destroy the conspiracy, but to serve as one instrument among many through which the truth will gradually emerge into the light. The evidence you have gathered about Daemon's legitimacy and the crimes committed against him will be shared, but in ways that support rather than force the natural process of awakening that is already underway throughout the realm. Maester Kibben outlines the practical steps that will need to be taken to ensure that your discoveries reach the people who can make the best use of them. Copies of the most important documents will be distributed to carefully selected individuals in positions of influence, while the full archive will be preserved in multiple hidden locations to prevent its destruction by order agents who might attempt to suppress the evidence. But perhaps more importantly, the spiritual insights that have emerged from your investigation will be shared through channels that the Order cannot easily monitor or control. The network of individuals who are awakening to their own spiritual potential provides a natural distribution system for truths that resonate with their deepest understanding, while those who are not ready for such revelations will simply dismiss them as fantasy or speculation. The approach represents a form of spiritual warfare that the Order is poorly equipped to counter, as it depends not on institutional authority or material resources, but on the natural human capacity for recognizing truth when it is presented in forms that speak to the deepest levels of consciousness. The conspiracy has spent centuries perfecting methods for controlling external behavior and suppressing inconvenient information, but they have no effective defense against the kind of internal transformation that makes such control irrelevant. As you work with your companions to organize and preserve the evidence you have gathered, you find yourself reflecting on how profoundly your own understanding has been transformed by this investigation. You began as a curious historian seeking to resolve inconsistencies in the official records, but you have ended as something approaching a spiritual warrior serving purposes that extend far beyond academic interest or personal satisfaction. The character arc that has carried you from naive researcher to conscious participant in cosmic transformation represents in microcosm the journey that countless others throughout the realm are beginning to undertake. The awakening of individual consciousness to its own spiritual potential is the key to dismantling the systems of control that have kept humanity in a state of artificial dependency for centuries. Daemon Blackfire's vindication is assured, but it will come as part of a much larger vindication of the human capacity for wisdom, justice, and authentic spiritual development. The rightful king will be remembered not just as a victim of political conspiracy, but as a symbol of the potential that exists within every individual to transcend the limitations imposed by those who profit from keeping consciousness confined within narrow boundaries. The broader implications of your discoveries extend far beyond the borders of Westeros, as the patterns you have uncovered represent universal tendencies within human civilization. The choice between spiritual development and material control is one that every society must face, and the consequences of choosing control over growth are always ultimately self-defeating, though the process of breakdown and renewal may take centuries to complete. Your investigation has revealed that the realm stands at a crucial juncture where the artificial systems that have maintained order through suppression are beginning to break down, creating opportunities for the emergence of more authentic forms of organization based on wisdom rather than force, voluntary cooperation rather than imposed authority, and spiritual maturity rather than external dependence. The knowledge that change is inevitable provides both comfort and challenge, as it means that truth will eventually prevail, but also that those who serve its cause must be prepared for the turbulence that accompanies any fundamental transformation. The breakdown of old systems creates temporary chaos before new forms of order can emerge, and those who live through such transitional periods must possess the spiritual strength to maintain their integrity while everything around them appears to be falling apart. But the vision has also revealed that you will not be working alone in the challenges that lie ahead. The spiritual forces that would have flowed through Daemon are now manifesting through countless individuals who are awakening to their own capacity for wisdom and authentic authority. The network of conscious beings that is emerging throughout the realm provides both support and guidance for anyone willing to serve the cause of truth and spiritual development. As evening approaches, and you prepare to take the first concrete steps toward sharing your discoveries with the wider world, you carry with you a sense of profound gratitude for having been chosen to participate in events of such cosmic significance. The investigation that began with historical curiosity has evolved into something resembling a sacred mission, though one that must be carried out through entirely practical means. The truth about Daemon Blackfyre will emerge gradually, working through natural channels of human communication and understanding rather than dramatic revelations that might trigger defensive reactions from those who still profit from the old systems of control. The rightful king's story will be told, but it will be told as part of a larger story of spiritual awakening that is already transforming the consciousness of the realm in ways that no conspiracy can prevent or control. The dying king's words that once promised to drown Westeros in blood have indeed created centuries of suffering, but that same tide is now beginning to carry the seeds of renewal that will eventually wash away every trace of the deception that has held the realm in spiritual bondage for so long. The resolution of Daemon's story marks not an ending, but a beginning of transformation that will ultimately restore the proper relationship between power and wisdom, authority and service, human ambition and cosmic purpose. The weeks that follow your ultimate revelation unfold with a strange mixture of urgency and serenity, as if the very act of uncovering the complete truth has somehow shifted the fundamental rhythms of existence itself. The knowledge you carry no longer feels like a burden that might crush you beneath its weight, but like a seed that has found proper soil and is beginning to sprout in ways that feel both natural and inevitable. Your days are spent in careful preparation for the gradual dissemination of truth that must now begin. But this work feels less like the frantic activity of conspirators and more like the patient cultivation practiced by wise gardeners who understand that the most profound changes require time and proper conditions to develop fully. The evidence about Daemon Blackfyre's legitimacy and the conspiracy that destroyed him has been copied and preserved in multiple locations, but more importantly, the spiritual insights that emerged from your investigation are beginning to find their way into conversations and contemplations throughout the realm. Maester Qyburn has taken on the role of coordinating these efforts with the quiet efficiency of someone who has spent decades learning how to work within corrupt systems while maintaining his own integrity. His network of contacts throughout the Citadel and beyond provides channels through which carefully selected pieces of information can begin to circulate, always presented in ways that appear to emerge naturally from scholarly research rather than deliberate revelation of dangerous secrets. Truth has its own intelligence, he explains, as you watch him prepare yet another seemingly innocent letter that will carry profound implications to its recipient. When people are ready to understand something, they will find ways to discover it even if no one deliberately teaches it to them. Our role is not to force revelations upon those who are not prepared, but to ensure that the information is available when the natural process of awakening creates a demand for it. Sir Brynden has undergone perhaps the most visible transformation of anyone involved in your investigation. The constant tension that had marked his bearing for as long as you had known him has been replaced by a deep calm that seems to radiate from some inner source of strength and purpose. The vindication of his family's honor has freed him from the burden of shame that had shaped his entire identity, but more importantly, his understanding of the larger purposes that his ancestors had served has given him a sense of meaning that transcends personal concerns. I used to think that honor was something you inherited or earned through your own actions. He reflects during one of your long conversations about the implications of what you have discovered. But now I understand that true honor comes from serving purposes that extend beyond your own lifetime, from being willing to sacrifice for principles that may not be vindicated until long after you are gone. My ancestors died fighting for something they could never have fully understood, but their sacrifice has contributed to a transformation that is only now beginning to manifest. His words capture something essential about the nature of the spiritual warfare in which you have all become participants. The cosmic forces that are working to elevate human consciousness operate according to timelines that dwarf individual lifespans, and those who serve these forces must be willing to plant seeds that others will harvest, to begin work that future generations will complete, to suffer defeats that will eventually be revealed as necessary steps toward ultimate victory. The personal cost of your investigation becomes clear as you attempt to return to something resembling normal life within the Citadel. The knowledge you possess has created a permanent barrier between yourself and those who remain unconscious of the deeper currents that shape political events. Casual conversations about current affairs feel hollow when you understand the hidden forces that drive those affairs. Academic discussions about historical interpretation seem almost trivial when you have witnessed the systematic manipulation of historical records for purposes that extend far beyond scholarly disagreement. But this isolation is balanced by a growing sense of connection to the network of awakening consciousness that is emerging throughout the realm. You find yourself able to recognize others who are beginning to sense the inadequacy of conventional explanations for the world's problems, even when they lack the specific information that would help them understand the true nature of what they are perceiving. These encounters, whether in the archives of the Citadel or the streets of Old Town, provide moments of deep communion that more than compensate for the alienation from mainstream society. The healing process that your investigation has initiated extends far beyond your own personal transformation. The very act of uncovering and preserving the truth about Daemon Blackfire has begun to heal wounds in the collective consciousness of Westeros that have festered for 3 centuries. The rightful king's story is beginning to be whispered in taverns and discussed in castle halls, not yet as historical fact, but as legend and speculation that carries the seeds of eventual recognition. More importantly, the spiritual principles that Daemon had represented are beginning to manifest through other channels as people throughout the realm start to hunger for more authentic forms of authority and governance. The careful balance of manipulation and control that the sacred order of preservation had maintained for so long is becoming increasingly unstable as growing numbers of individuals refuse to accept the artificial limitations that have been imposed upon their spiritual development. Your research reveals that this process of awakening is not confined to Westeros, but is manifesting throughout the known world as the spiritual forces that were suppressed by various conspiracies and control systems begin to reassert themselves through natural channels. The pattern that had emerged in your investigation of the Blackfire Rebellion represents a universal template that can be applied to understanding similar struggles between consciousness and control that have shaped the history of every civilization. The implications of this realization extend far beyond academic interest. If the breakdown of artificial control systems is indeed a natural and inevitable process, then the turbulence that characterizes the current political situation throughout the realm represents not just temporary chaos, but the birth pangs of a new form of civilization based on more authentic principles of organization and authority. The relationship dynamics between your small group of investigators have evolved into something resembling a spiritual brotherhood bound together by shared understanding of purposes that extend far beyond personal concerns. The bonds forged through your common exposure to dangerous truths and your mutual commitment to serving the cause of spiritual awakening have created a form of loyalty that transcends ordinary friendship or professional cooperation. But perhaps the most significant aspect of your healing process involves your growing understanding of the role that forgiveness must play in any authentic resolution of the injustices you have uncovered. The crimes committed against Daemon Blackfire and countless others over the centuries demand acknowledgement and accountability, but they also require a response that transcends mere vengeance or punishment. The members of the Sacred Order of Preservation who orchestrated these crimes were themselves victims of the same spiritual poverty that they imposed upon others. Their fear of uncontrolled spiritual forces had led them to choose security over growth, predictability over wisdom, artificial order over authentic development. Understanding this does not excuse their actions, but it does provide a framework for response that focuses on healing rather than retribution. This insight proves crucial as you begin to encounter evidence that some current members of the Order's successor organizations are themselves becoming aware of the spiritual bankruptcy of the systems they serve. The same forces that are awakening consciousness throughout the realm are also working within the conspiracy itself, creating opportunities for redemption and transformation even among those who have spent their lives serving the cause of spiritual suppression. Your investigation has revealed that the ultimate victory over the forces of control and manipulation will come not through external defeat, but through internal transformation, as those who serve such systems gradually awaken to the futility and spiritual poverty of their mission. The conspiracy that seemed so powerful and entrenched when you first began to uncover its existence is actually in the process of dissolving from within as its own members begin to understand the self-defeating nature of their activities. The wisdom integration that emerges from your investigation provides practical guidance for navigating the challenges that lie ahead. The evidence you have preserved about Daemon's legitimacy and the crimes committed against him will eventually play a role in the broader process of historical correction that must accompany any authentic spiritual transformation. But that role will emerge naturally from changing consciousness rather than being forced through dramatic revelations or confrontations. The knowledge you have gained about the methods and motivations of those who oppose spiritual development provides invaluable insight for recognizing and countering similar patterns in the future. But this knowledge must be applied with wisdom and compassion, rather than used as a weapon against those who remain trapped in unconscious service to destructive purposes. Most importantly, your understanding of the cosmic forces that are working to elevate human consciousness provides both guidance and comfort for the difficult work that lies ahead. The transformation that is beginning to manifest throughout the realm represents not just a local phenomenon, but a universal process that operates according to principles that transcend human understanding or control. As the season turns and autumn settles over Old Town like a gentle benediction, you find yourself possessed of a peace that had seemed impossible when your investigation began. The truth about Daemon Blackfire has been uncovered and preserved, but more importantly, the spiritual forces that he had represented have found new channels through which to manifest their transformative power. The rightful king rests easier in death, knowing that his story will eventually be told and his vindication will eventually come. But his greatest satisfaction comes from understanding that the purposes he had been born to serve are being fulfilled through means that extend far beyond what any single ruler could have accomplished. The crown that was denied him in life has been transformed into something far more valuable, a symbol of the spiritual authority that exists within every individual who chooses to serve truth over comfort, growth over security, wisdom over control. The investigation that began with historical curiosity has evolved into something resembling a sacred mission, but the completion of that mission marks not an ending, but a beginning of service to purposes that will continue to unfold for generations to come. The seeds of transformation have been planted, and those who planted them can now trust in the intelligence of truth itself to ensure that those seeds will sprout and grow according to the perfect timing of cosmic wisdom. The first snows of winter are beginning to fall over the Seven Kingdoms as your journey into the hidden history of Daemon Blackfire draws to its peaceful close. From the window of your chamber in the Citadel, you watch the gentle white flakes drift down like benedictions from a sky that seems unusually serene, as if the very heavens are acknowledging the completion of work that has cosmic significance beyond what mortal minds can fully comprehend. The months since your ultimate revelation have passed with the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding one's proper place in the vast tapestry of existence. The urgent sense of mission that had driven your investigation has transformed into something deeper and more sustainable, a calm commitment to serving purposes that extend far beyond personal ambition or desire for recognition. The truth about the rightful king has been preserved and is beginning to find its way into the world through channels that operate according to their own perfect timing. In the distance, beyond the walls of Old Town, the Whispering Wood stands silent beneath its blanket of snow, its ancient trees holding secrets that span millennia rather than mere centuries. The weirwoods that you visited during your investigation continue their eternal vigil, serving as bridges between the world of matter and the realm of spirit, witnesses to the endless cycle of growth and renewal that governs all existence. The truth about Daemon Blackfire has taken its place within that larger cycle, no longer a burden of dangerous knowledge, but a gift of understanding that serves the purposes of healing and restoration. The rightful king's story is being told in whispers and songs, in scholarly discussions and tavern conversations, gradually working its way into the collective consciousness of the realm like water seeping into thirsty soil. But more importantly, the spiritual principles that Daemon had embodied are manifesting through countless individuals who are awakening to their own capacity for wisdom and authentic authority. The awakening that your investigation helped to catalyze is spreading throughout Westeros like rings expanding outward from a stone dropped into still water, each new consciousness that opens to its spiritual potential, creating ripples that touch others in ways both subtle and profound. The landscapes that witnessed the tragedy of the Blackfire Rebellion are beginning to know peace in ways they have not experienced for centuries. The fields of Redgrass, where the rightful king fell in battle, seem to glow with their own internal light when the setting sun catches the snow that covers them. Local people speak of dreams and visions that visit those who walk those ancient grounds, gentle encounters with spirits who no longer rage against injustice, but radiate the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that truth will eventually prevail. The Blackwater Rush flows toward the sea, with the same steady persistence it has maintained since the world was young. But something in its current seems different now, more purposeful, as if the very water carries messages of hope and renewal to distant shores. The ravens, that once seemed ominous in their watchfulness, now appear to be messengers of transformation, their cries echoing across the winter landscape like announcements of changes that approach with the certainty of spring following winter. Your own transformation continues to unfold in ways that surprise and humble you. The scholar who began this investigation seeking only to resolve historical inconsistencies has evolved into something approaching a guardian of cosmic truth, the one who serves that truth through the most ordinary and humble means. The evidence you preserved continues to find its way to those who can make the best use of it, while the spiritual insights that emerged from your journey provide guidance for others who are beginning to awaken to their own capacity for wisdom and service. Maester Kirban has aged visibly during the months since your revelation, but the weight that bows his shoulders seems to be the burden of profound understanding rather than mere physical tiredness. He speaks often of his gratitude for having lived long enough to see the truth about the sacred order of preservation finally exposed, but more importantly, he radiates the peace that comes from knowing that the purposes he has served throughout his life have been aligned with forces that transcend human politics and temporal concerns. I have seen the completion of work that began before I was born and will continue long after I am gone. He reflects during one of your final conversations before winter settles too deeply for regular travel. The knowledge we preserved will serve purposes that we cannot fully understand, but we can trust in the intelligence of truth itself to ensure that it reaches those who need it when the proper time arrives. Sir Brynden has departed Old Town to return to his family lands, but his farewell carried promises of continued service to the cause of truth and spiritual awakening that transcends any particular investigation or revelation. The vindication of his ancestors has freed him to serve purposes that extend far beyond family honor, and his understanding of the cosmic significance of individual choice has transformed him into something approaching a spiritual warrior in the service of consciousness itself. The network of awakening individuals that has emerged from your investigation continues to expand throughout the realm, each new member bringing their own gifts and perspectives to the collective work of transformation. Some serve through scholarly research that gradually corrects historical distortions, others through artistic expressions that carry spiritual truths to audiences who might not be ready for more direct forms of teaching, still others through simple acts of kindness and wisdom that demonstrate the practical applications of authentic spiritual development. The cyclical nature of the forces you have encountered becomes more apparent with each passing season. The patterns that destroyed Daemon Blackfire represent recurring themes in human civilization, but so do the patterns that are now working to heal the wounds that such destructions create. The same cosmic intelligence that allows seeds to lie dormant through long winters before sprouting in perfect timing operates through human consciousness to ensure that truth emerges when conditions are right for its reception and application. Your understanding of the endless cycle of knowledge and loss has deepened into appreciation for the wisdom that governs such cycles. The spiritual truths that the sacred order of preservation worked so hard to suppress were never really in danger of permanent destruction because they exist at levels of reality that transcend human manipulation or control. The conspiracy could delay their manifestation and distort their expression, but they could not eliminate forces that operate according to principles rooted in the fundamental structure of existence itself. The legacy themes that have emerged from your investigation provide comfort and guidance for navigating the uncertainties that inevitably accompany any period of fundamental transformation. Daemon Blackfire will be remembered not just as a victim of political conspiracy, but as a symbol of the spiritual potential that exists within every individual who chooses to serve truth over convenience, growth over security, wisdom over mere cleverness. His story will be retold in countless forms over the generations to come, each retelling adapted to the needs and understanding of its particular audience, but all carrying the same essential message about the importance of spiritual authenticity and the ultimate futility of attempts to suppress the natural development of human consciousness. The rightful king's crown has been transformed into something far more valuable than any material symbol of authority, becoming instead a reminder that true kingship exists within the heart of anyone who chooses to serve purposes larger than personal ambition. The gentle rhythm of your final reflections on this extraordinary journey mirrors the peaceful breathing of a realm that is slowly settling into the deep rest that must precede any authentic renewal. The investigation that began with such urgency and danger has resolved into the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding one's proper role in events that extend far beyond individual lifetime or personal recognition. As evening settles over Old Town, and the candles in your chamber cast dancing shadows on walls that have witnessed so much history, you find yourself grateful beyond words for having been chosen to participate in the uncovering of truths that have cosmic significance. The burden of dangerous knowledge has been transformed into the gift of understanding, and that understanding now serves purposes that extend far beyond your own concerns or desires. The mysteries that wait to be uncovered in the vast library of existence will provide challenges and opportunities for future generations of truth seekers, but your particular mission has reached its natural completion. The seeds of transformation have been planted with careful attention to proper timing and appropriate conditions, and those seeds can now be trusted to sprout and grow according to the perfect intelligence that governs all authentic development. And so tonight, as snow continues to fall over the seven kingdoms and the ancient stones of castles and septs settle into their winter rest, the story of Daemon Blackfire finds its proper place within the larger story of spiritual awakening that is slowly transforming the consciousness of the realm. The rightful king sleeps peacefully at last, his vindication assured and his purposes fulfilled through means that extend far beyond what any mortal ruler could have accomplished. The whisper that was lost in time has indeed grown into a storm across eternity, but it is a storm that brings renewal rather than destruction, awakening rather than chaos, healing rather than further wounding. The investigation that began with curiosity about historical inconsistencies has evolved into participation in the eternal work of consciousness itself, and that work continues with the patience and persistence of water wearing away stone, of seeds sprouting in their proper season, of truth emerging into light when the time is exactly right. If you have followed this journey into the hidden corners of Westerosi history, if you have walked with us through the shadows of conspiracy and emerged into the light of ultimate understanding, then perhaps you too have been touched by the same forces that are working to awaken consciousness throughout the realm and beyond. The invitation to continue exploring these mysteries remains open for those who feel called to serve the cause of truth in whatever way their circumstances allow. The ancient halls of power rest quietly now beneath their blanket of snow, but they dream of the spring that will inevitably come, bringing with it the fulfillment of promises that have waited centuries for their proper time to bloom. And in that dreaming, all the mysteries yet to be uncovered wait patiently for the next generation of seekers, brave enough to ask the questions that need to be asked and wise enough to handle the answers when they come.